Release that which I by Ermu. Chapter 501, Body of Steel, Part 2. Eden was a newly promoted knight in King's City who had no land and no inheritable title, placing him in the lowest rank among the nobles. Some great nobles even believed that knights were not part of the nobles and only held honorary titles. Thus, he was very excited to enforce Timothy's blockade order. Since he had sailing experience from his younger days, and the king preferred new recruits, he eventually became the captain of a hawk-headed ship. He believed that he was a good judge of opportunity. This blockade was his chance to prove himself and be crowned as a real nobleman, since most of the noblemen were not willing to leave the comfort of their homes to fight on ships for months. It was also easy for him to prove himself because both merchant ships and caravans stood no chance against him. If local lords sent knights to protect the caravans on land, the merchant ships would be left vulnerable. As long as he was not too greedy, he would be able to complete this mission to His Majesty Timothy's satisfaction. Of course, His Majesty's satisfaction depends on how much money and cargo I can seize. At this thought, he glanced coldly at the happy rats on the boat across from him. They had intercepted a merchant ship from Redwater City yesterday, and although the captain insisted he was sailing to Fallen Dragon Ridge, they still seized all his cargo and killed most of the crew. The cargo mostly consisted of furs, wine, and a jar of gold royals. And these idiots dared to treat the seized cargo like their own spoils and divided it among themselves according to Blackstreet rules. Eden chuckled coldly at this thought. The rats have no clue that their only purposes in this blockade are to openly plunder ships and to appease local lords. When the rebel king Roland is defeated, the rats' heads will be sent to the lords who were affected by the blockade as an apology from the king. Then, the seized goods will definitely be added to the palace's vault. But these rats see this mission as a chance to strike rich and have no clue about their imminent deaths. How ironic. "My lord, there's movement ahead," shouted the sailor from the lookout position. Eden peered out from the bow and saw a puff of black smoke in the distance, as if something was burning on the river. After a while, a gray smudge emerged and began to approach them. It was definitely a ship, but he could not see its sail. "Isn't it traveling a little too fast for a ship?" asked his assistant after staring for a while. Eden had also noticed this. Its speed was frighteningly fast, even for going downstream, and it had grown to the size of his palm from a gray speck in less than half an hour. He could also tell by its distance that it was much larger than regular merchant ships. The other two hawk-headed ships had also spotted the target, and one of them began paddling quickly to reach this strange merchant ship before everyone else. "My lord, should we approach as well?" asked Eden's assistant. Eden pondered for a while and said, "Let's wait and observe first." He noticed that the hawk-headed ship behind him that was commanded by Baron Derrick was also holding back, while Rat's ship was already preparing to board the strange ship. When he got a clear view of the approaching boat, Eden gasped in shock, and everyone on deck also exclaimed. The sailor on the mast shouted, "My God, my lord, what in the world is that?" Unlike sea ships with copper bottoms, the entire ship made of uniform glistening metal, including the strange iron tower on top of it. Its bow parted the river like a shuttle in fabric, and the foam it stirred up revealed how fast this steel vessel was going. The boat gave off a deep whistle as it plowed forward and turned to crash straight into the first hawk-headed ship. The hawk-headed ship was sailing sideways in order to board the approaching boat, a tactic that worked with slow merchant boats but left them vulnerable against this fast steel vessel. Before it could turn around and escape, the vessel had already crashed into its defenseless side. Its wood side split open with a loud crack, and the entire ship almost turned over into the river, as if it had been pushed by a giant hand. Fierce waves crashed onto the deck, and many men were flung straight into the water. God! Eden's assistant stared in fear. "It's heading straight towards us." "The enemies are attacking," shouted the sailors. "My lord, the enemies are attacking." People began scrambling to set up bows and fill their flintlocks with ammunition. Eden saw the flag of the tower and twin guns on top of the steel vessel, gulped and ordered, gritting his teeth, "Tell the rowers to start moving and take us close to shore." He had never seen this flag before, but he guessed that such a terrifying thing could only be invented by the prince of the western region, who was rumored to deal with demons. Not only was it giant, but its speed was also faster than slim galleys. A mortal could never achieve this. "Aren't we going to retreat?" asked his assistant, trembling. "Retreat?" Eden yelled angrily. "How can we outrun a ship that is faster than us? Our only hope is to stay near the shore to prevent it from crashing into us and try to board it by circling behind." "Damn it, go relay my orders." He pushed his panicking assistant aside and felt a chill as he saw the damaged hawk-headed ship. He could imagine how bad the situation inside the hull was. The steel vessel's bow was completely stuck inside its side, wrecking, if not completely splitting, the thin and flimsy hawk-headed ship. The unluckiest sailors were the rowers, who were either smashed to death by the steel bow, or worse, trapped in the hull and drowned. Cries and curses erupted from the boat, and the fear they conveyed made Eden pity even the rats on board. Their circumstances were reversed, the hunter had become the prey. As the current kept flowing and the steel vessel slowed down, the twisted hawk-headed ship fell off of the enemy's hull and turned over, spilling bloody river water from its hull. The second hawk-headed ship was desperately trying to turn around and run away, but the ominous whistle sounded again, and with a deafening rumble and long cloud of smoke, the steel vessel began advancing towards its next target. Chapter 502, Body of Steel, Part 3. The second hawk-headed ship was still turning around, so its side was directly facing the steel vessel, making it even more vulnerable than the first. The rats were all terrified by the incoming steel vessel, but a few of them still attempted to shoot the enemy with bolts. However, the bolts were as tiny as a needle compared to the giant boat and did not even make a dent. Soon, the unstoppable steel vessel directly smashed into the center of the hawk-headed ship's side, instantly crushing a dozen of its paddles. Then, to Eden's disbelief, the river current and force of the impact caused the hawk-headed ship to flip sideways, which also lifted the bow of the enemy ship into the air. The steel bow rose up and then crashed down heavily onto the hawk-headed ship's deck. The hawk-headed ship cracked with a shrill sound, and the unharmed rats jumped into the water to escape, while the others trailed blood all over the deck, screaming in pain from their injuries. Eden watched the steel vessel slowly lower into the thin hawk-headed ship, which fell apart under the weight with a series of cracking sounds. Its hull could not withstand the pressure and suddenly snapped in half, causing both ends to shoot upwards with a great splash. The two halves did not immediately sink, but floated like corpses on the river with only half of the side port above water. On the other hand, the steel vessel did not have a single scratch on it and instead began to charge toward Eden's ship. Eden heard the sailors around him gasp in fear. His hawk-headed ship was about to be the fifth one to be instantly snapped in half, and he was preparing to abandon the ship. Luckily, he had given the right orders before. His ship was completely pressed against the shore, and the enemy was turning to pursue the remaining barren derrick, which was trying to escape. "Raise all your bows and torches." Eden took a deep breath and roared, "I want all of these cowards hiding in this metal shell dead. I'll give you 1 gold royal for every enemy you kill. Do you hear me? 1 gold royal." If he survived and escaped back to King City, he would definitely never be promoted, so his only chance of gaining Timothy's approval was to defeat the rebel king's ship. Even though this ship might have been produced by demons, the crew on it was still human and defeatable. The sailors seemed to regain some of their confidence after dodging the last round of the enemy's attacks. These men all dealt with murder in their previous jobs, so they were used to seeing blood and gore. As long as they were not going to be completely slaughtered, they were still willing to earn a gold royal or two. When the hawk-headed ship was completely safe from being hit, it left the shore and sailed parallel to the steel vessel, slowly inching toward its course, until the two ships were sailing alongside each other. Before the steel vessel passed them and when the two ships were only meters apart, the sailors raised their various weapons. They would first fire at the passing ship and then board it to attack the crew, which was the common tactic used against merchant ships. However, there was not a single man on deck, only a dark tube encased in metal and containing a row of small holes, pointing directly at the sailors. Before Eden could figure out what this thing was, the tube began to spit tongues of flames. Bursts of blood began to appear among the row of armed men, and wooden fragments and gore flew everywhere. The sailors were cut down like rows of grass, while the surviving ones immediately began to search for cover. However, neither barrels nor masts were a match against the metal tube, which shattered the barrels and snapped the masts with a loud crack. After the sails fell into the water, the hawk-headed ship began to slow down. Eden did not get the victory he had dreamed of. He realized that the tube was some sort of flintlock, but it was much faster and shot out streams of bullets with a hissing sound. However, he could not understand how the rebel king managed to drastically improve such a slow and inaccurate weapon. Perhaps this could only be explained as the power of the devil. Soon, he was struck by a shower of bullets. This was Rodney's first time witnessing such a battle. The Roland barreled its solid bow straight through the enemy ships as if they were dry weeds, leaving them completely helpless. He waited by the cannons for an order to open fire, but that order never came. When the fourth enemy ship was left floating in pieces in the river, the battle was officially over. The enemy's screams and groans filled the air, while the survivors gave up their faith, swam to shore, and escaped without hesitation into the forest. His Highness did not order the crew to chase after these deserters and left them to run off on their own. There were also some badly injured men who were holding on to their last breaths and lying against the broken ships, but no one tried to save them from their inevitable deaths. What a shame. Job put the unused shells back in their cases. I thought we'd be able to show off the true power of cannons to those fellows in the gun battalion. Yes, agreed Nelson disappointedly. Compared to the ammunition we used for the heavy machine guns, a round of cannon shells uses about the same amount and is much more effective. That's enough. Miss Anna personally made these, so they're much more valuable than machine gun bullets, which are produced by the hundred every day, said Vanner with a frown. You'll get your chance when we attack the city, so be sure to aim well and save face for the artillery battalion. I handpicked all of you to join your elite team, Commander. You've told us this many times, said Nelson, splaying his hands. Don't worry, it won't take more than 3 shells to blow open the gate in King City. He nudged Rodney. Hey, say something. I want a battleship like this one. What? The other 4 men were shocked. I hope to own a shallow water gunboat like this one someday. He repeated, his eyes glittering with excitement. I'm going to call it the Rodney. Wait, don't you think your elder brother deserves this honor first? The second boat should be called the Nelson. No way. I'm not giving you that right. Save it, you two. The second boat will definitely be called the Vanner. Don't forget that I brought all of you into the elite mortar team. Here we go again. Cat's Claw sighed. Could it be called the Cat's Claw or the Jop? Jop mumbled quietly. No, responded the 3 men in unison. After the concrete boats caught up to the flagship, the expedition fleet resumed its journey. 2 days later, King City's gray city wall emerged into sight. Chapter 503, The Battle of King City, Part 1. Your Highness, there's a platoon guarding the pier area, Lightning, who was responsible for monitoring the enemy's situation, reported. There are about 100 of them, and judging from their uniforms, they seem to be militia. Only 100? Roland was slightly surprised. It was predictable that Timothy would deploy troops to the pier of the outlying district. The massive fleet was certain to be noticed when it passed through Redwater City and Silver City. Though steamships were much faster than sailing ships, and could in 5 days cover a distance which the latter would require 7 days for, they were still not as fast as messengers who continuously changed horses and traveled round the clock. Not to mention pigeons. If the new king's spies used pigeons to deliver their report, Timothy would have received the news 2 or 3 days in advance. But it was unexpected that Timothy would deploy only 100 men to defend the pier. Roland had imagined that the first battle would take place in its vicinity. He anticipated that crossbowmen, musketeers, and even mangonels would be stationed along both banks of the river in order to prevent his troops from landing on shore successfully. This was why he wanted to build inland river gunboats in time for the spring offensive. The efficiency of transportation by water was much higher than that of by land, but its disadvantage was that the troops had to alight at a dock and thus could be easily ambushed. If his army had the capability to attack across the shore, it would be able to handle any ambush easily and create a secure landing point. It seemed as though Timothy had already given up on the massive advantage he would have while Roland's troops were landing. From Roland's perspective, although this was the right decision, it was unjustifiable. It was impossible that Timothy knew about the range and power of his 152mm naval artillery. As Roland thought about this, he beckoned Sylvie over. "Are the militiamen carrying any berserk pills?" Sylvie summoned her eye of magic and took some time to observe the scene. "I don't see anything that looks like a pill. Some of them don't even have any weapons on them. But, there's something strange about the ground." "The ground?" "They have buried a few things in the ground, there are also some on the pier." Sylvie strained her brows to observe even more carefully. "Crocks and barrels, they're filled with dark gray powder." "Gunpowder?" Nightingale exclaimed uncontrollably. "Well, that makes sense," Roland said, acting as calm as he could. "The militia is just a bait to draw our attention. By presenting us with a false opportunity to scramble ashore and capture the pier, Timothy will then ignite the gunpowder and blow all of us up." In his heart, he was not as calm as he appeared. This strategy was similar to the landmine warfare of the past and was indeed a good plan. Though he saw through it early, his troops would still need to land on shore. Having made the choice to travel by water, the pier was a necessary crossing, and it seemed that Timothy was aware of this inevitability. He probably hoped to catch Roland by surprise by setting up an ambush instead of fighting straight up. If Sylvie was not around, there was a chance that Roland would have walked right into the trap. The solution to this was fairly accomplishable. As Timothy did not have wireless methods to ignite the gunpowder, he would have to deploy people near the barrels to do the ignition. All that Roland had to do was to eliminate these people. In any case, it was important to preserve the pier, or else he would not be able to transport his cannons and ammunition on shore. Through Sylvie's careful observation, Roland was able to pinpoint two places where the ignition was likely to be carried out. One was situated in a shack on the edge of the pier, as evident from a long iron pipe that connected it to the nearest barrel. The other was situated in the pier's warehouse. The two places had a similar feature, a shifting black hole formed by a god stone of retaliation. After some discussion with Iron Axe, Roland quickly decided the battle plan. First, Nightingale would sneak into the warehouse, silently dispose of the ignition crew, and guard the gate against substitutes running in and igniting the gunpowder. Then, Roland would use the naval artillery to destroy the shack. There was no problem even if it caused the gunpowder to ignite, so long as the pier remained in good condition. Leaning against a battlement on the west side of King's City, the Steelheart Knight, Weimer, raised his telescope and observed the movement on the river. The long and thin canal was like a strip of glittering gold ribbon which cut through the brown and white plains, of which much of the accumulated snow had already melted to reveal a vivid green that came from the sprouting of grass. This was proof that earthly things were coming back to life. Such a view was always pleasurable regardless of the occasion. The only things that did not fit the scene were the billows of black smoke that drifted through the air directly above the canal. "It's the fleet of the rebel king, Roland Wimbledon. I never thought that he'd really dare to attack King's City." Although Weimer felt that it was laughable, he also developed a hint of admiration for Roland. Ever since this capital city was built more than 200 years ago, it had never been attacked. Once an enemy saw the towering and magnificent bluestone walls of the city, the courage to attack would naturally fizzle away. Not everyone possessed the audacity to fight when it was clear that the enemy held an absolute advantage. At least, Timothy Wimbledon surely doesn't possess this courage. While the person who does possess it is our enemy, unfortunately. The knight was committed to his honor. As the guardian knight of King's City, he was entrusted with the responsibility of defending it, and would have to fulfill his duty until the very end. "Sir, the rebel king's fleet is here." A squire ran up to the battlements and yelled. "Hush, I saw it long ago." Weimer placed his telescope down and spat out some saliva. "Convey my order that the 1st and 2nd Cavalry shall mount their horses and await my command behind the city gate, while the mercenaries shall follow closely behind the cavalries." Tell them not to piss their pants when the gunpowder explodes. The oil boilers will also be set on fire, even though I doubt that the enemy will be able to touch this side of the city wall." The knights nearby burst into laughter at once. According to the plan, after allowing the rebel king's platoon to occupy the pier, flags would be raised along the city wall. At this time, the snow powder buried near the pier would be ignited, which would be certain to disarray and damage the enemy substantially. Then, the city gates would be opened for the cavalries to launch their attack, ultimately delivering a comfortable victory. Those country bumpkins from the western region probably believe that King's City is comparable to their grandest city, Longsong Stronghold. Just climb a ladder and the city can be seized. The Iron Feather Knight, Scar, chimed in. "I think that you can save the firewood and bring them home to burn. Just for precaution." What a fool, Weimer silently thought. Even if things like the boiling oil or the rolling stones aren't effective in battle, they must still be displayed for His Highness' sake. Trying to be cheap just because the enemy's too weak to break in, with this kind of mentality, he'll surely be kicked out of the city's knightage by Timothy sooner or later. He raised up the telescope once again, only to see the frontmost sailless ship detach from the rest of the fleet and head towards the pier on its own. The top of the ship billowed black smoke which could be seen from miles away, while there were no paddles on either side of the ship. It was unclear to him how the ship operated. But these were unimportant details. No matter how weird a ship was, it could not come on shore and fight. The sailless ship gradually reduced its speed and unhurriedly docked at the pier on the opposite shore. What are they trying to do? Scar raised his eyebrows. Do they intend to alight on the opposite shore? Don't tell me that 100 militiamen scare the rebel king? Weimer also felt surprised. Usually, when an enemy saw that the pier's defense was paper-thin, it would try to capture the pier quickly. He opened his mouth to say something, but just then, a blaze of fire lit up in front of the strange-looking ship. The orange-red flame seemed to create a new dawn. Chapter 504, The Battle of King City, Part 2. A few seconds after the flames blazed, Weimer heard a dull thunderous sound. It came from a far distance away. Although its tone was not high, it was nevertheless powerful. He saw that right next to the shack, a pillar of earth rose up in tune with the sound. What just happened? Was the snow powder ignited? Doesn't seem like it. It seems to have been done by that ship. What a joke. It's about a mile away. The knights were busy discussing among themselves. Weimer frowned and wondered. Could it be that the enemy has noticed something strange about the ground? According to the intelligence gathered from various channels, the rebel king possessed extremely powerful snow powder weapons which were superior in both range and accuracy to anything the King's City blacksmiths were able to knock up. Hence, from the beginning, Timothy had decided not to engage in direct combat, but instead to use the snow powder barrels as ambush so that Roland's weapons would be rendered useless. The things that released fire at the front of the ship were likely to be enlarged versions of the weapons. They were able to load more snow powder and shoot a more powerful projectile. The only issue was that they were much more difficult to manufacture than handheld weapons. Already, despite Timothy putting all of the city's blacksmiths to work throughout the winter, the devices they were able to create were not even as good as trebuchets. After a short while, the flames appeared once again, followed by the same thunderous sound. This time, the earth pillar attached itself firmly to the shack and flew up, causing mud to splotch all over the roof of the shack. Weimer's guess was proven correct. Clearly, the enemy had conceived a plan to get to the shack, which meant that they knew about the snow powder hidden near to the pier. As such, Timothy's ambush tactic failed. Weimer quietly thought to himself, perhaps they do have a chance to touch the city wall. After this battle, it would become evident whether the snow powder weapons were more powerful or the walls of King City were sturdier. Just then, a booming sound was heard from the battlements. It was louder and more sonorous than anything the knights had ever heard, as though thunder clapped right beside their ears. A small hill began to arch upward in the space in front of the pier. Dirt and stones were hurled into the air before smoke and fog burst out of the dirt, forming a visible cloud-shaped gaseous mass. Violent quake swept through the land, and in an instant, the top of the city wall began to sway terribly. Weimer instinctively crouched his body, but Scar suffered a foot sprain and fell to the ground beside him. After reaching its maximum height, the flying soil began to fall like torrential rain. Yet, it did not make any noise when it hit the ground. Weimer's ears buzzed for a while, and it took some time for him to regain his senses after the tremors. Damn it, that fool didn't wait for the flag signal to ignite the snow powder. The ground, which was originally flat, now looked as if it had been chewed upon. Bumps and hollows were everywhere, while hot and white smoke emitted from the loose black mud, filling the air with the smell of gunpowder. Weimer leaned one side of his head out from behind the battlement. He saw that in the distance, the fleet began to move once again. The ships formed a straight line as they headed toward the pier. The decoy militiamen were either paralyzed on the pier, or had dropped their weapons and fled in various directions. Who was responsible for the ignition? Scar, who was angry from embarrassment, held a guard by the collar and interrogated. "I'll wring his head off." "It was a person arranged by His Highness." Weimer snapped. "Watch the enemy carefully. They're coming on shore any time now. Prepare to raise the blue flag." "I hope the fella hiding in the warehouse will be able to complete his mission," he thought. However, there was no movement in the pier area at all, and the enemy's crews were able to land the shore easily. Alan Alba was busy maintaining his rapier when the thunderous booms sounded and shook the earth. The violent explosions and tremors almost caused him to drop the rapier out of shock. Though he knew in advance that this would happen, he did not expect the sound of exploding snow powder to be so loud and terrifying. After all, it took place at least 2 miles away from where he was. How does it feel like on the scene? He wondered. Using his hands, he soothed his mount which had turned restless. Then, he kept his rapier in its sheath and beckoned toward the cavalries behind him. "When the gate opens, you'll follow my charge. Don't hold back your horse's energy. They have no way to retreat." From the uncertain response he received, it was apparent that few among the horsemen had recovered from the thunderous shock waves. Alan cried out loudly, "This is a trap set by His Highness. The wrath of thunder shall punish our enemies, not us. Gather yourselves, our enemies have nowhere to run." Yes, the response this time was slightly more in unison. The mercenaries waiting behind the cavalries were still in a dazed state. Alan shook his head disdainfully. He had never taken these people seriously, they were merely the back line responsible for cleaning up the mess on the battlefield. After quite a long while, the city gate was still yet to be opened. What's going on? He glanced toward the top of the city walls with suspicion. The Steelheart Knight had not issued any new orders, however, as the charge could begin at any time, Alan could not leave his position and inquire about the situation. Time went by slowly. All of a sudden, he heard a dull and muffled sound which seemed to originate from very far away. If he did not remember wrongly, it was the enemy's signal to attack. Did something go wrong with the plan? Didn't the snow powder trap cause the enemy to disperse and flee? Phew. As Alan's anxiety reached its tipping point, he suddenly heard a strange wind sound. Before he could gather his thoughts, the bricks beside the city gate split open at once. Ka-cha! Stones and slags flew in all directions. He felt numbness around his waist and fell off his horse stiffly. The startled horse even stepped on his thigh as it attempted to flee. The extreme pain caused Alan to howl. "Ah, my leg! Captain! My Lord Alan!" 2 squires quickly gathered around him. "Control the platoon, and stop them from running around," Alan shouted while trying to bear with the stinging pain. The formation of the cavalries was in complete disarray. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, and many rode on their horses as they tried to avoid the objects flying through the air. Though the squires issued instructions as loud as they could, it was difficult for them to take charge of the situation while this was going on. Alan tried several times to stand up but failed each time. Turning his head, he was horrified to see that his thigh had twisted into an irregular shape, and was badly ruptured and lacerated. His armor plate had deformed and tilted to one side, while a dislocated white bone had torn through his flesh and trouser to expose a small section with bits of tissue hanging on it. Alan's heart began to turn cold. He knew that his career as a knight was effectively over. Just then, he heard the strange wind sound again. This time, the city gate was where the change occurred. Alan saw the two guards standing at the city gate instantly become enveloped by large masses of debris, before flying pieces of wood and stone swept through them like a swarm of bees. When the debris dissipated, Alan was astounded to see that the upper bodies of the two guards seemed as if they had been sliced with sharp knives. Fresh blood mixed together with their red-green innards and trickled onto the floor. Behind them were another 5 or 6 horsemen heaped on the floor unconscious. What had appeared to be harmless pieces of wood had turned into deadly weapons and sliced through the bodies like knives. Even the pieces of stone, which were only the size of a thumb, were able to penetrate the guards' helmets and armors. Furthermore, a gap of the size of a basin had appeared on the city gate, which was nearly 2 feet thick. All these had happened while the enemy was still more than 3 miles away. Demons, the enemies are demons. Out of nowhere, someone shouted something, and the scene, which was already dreadful and chaotic enough, became even more disastrous. The cavalries, which had been prepared for the assault, hastily turned their mounts backward and galloped away. As they caught up with the fleeing mercenaries, they trampled over bodies and created even more serious disorder. In the twinkling of an eye, the situation near the West City Wall had become completely out of control. Alan had no more energy left to support his body. He collapsed on the floor and looked towards the sky helplessly. The cries of panic from the crowd and the continuous sounds of things breaking apart seemed to become more and more distant, and his surroundings gradually became quieter. He had one last thought in his mind. It's so cold. Chapter 505, The Battle of King City, Part 3. Meanwhile, Lightning, Wendy, Maggie and Hummingbird were executing the final attack before the main offensive. Because the main artillery of the battleships only fired solid bullets, they were largely ineffective against the personnel and defense facilities on the city wall. Hence, the witches aimed to destroy the first line of defense so as to puncture the enemy's effective strength and open up a safe channel for the general offensive. This was also the first time that the hydrogen balloon was used in battle. Unlike the 1,000-mile raid 5 months back, the balloon lifted off from just beside the canal this time, allowing almost everyone to witness the ascent of this colossal object. Under Roland's plan, the hydrogen balloon, which could move anywhere without hindrance, was advanced enough to be used as a short-distance bomber during this era. With the fleet behind it providing logistical support, this earmarked the beginning of the generation of aircraft carrier combat. Standing on the pier, the soldiers of the First Army burst into fervent applause. They knew well that no enemy was able to resist an aerial attack and therefore their wise and benevolent lord was certain to win this war. Quickly, the hydrogen balloon drifted to the sky directly above King's City. From its perspective, the majestic capital was only about the size of a palm. Lightning pulled down her windshield goggles and gestured to Wendy to release the bomb. The latter nodded back at her and pulled the mechanism. Shortly, a bomb dislodged from its frame and fell towards the ground. Another difference of this aerial attack from previous times was that Anna was not on board but was replaced by Hummingbird. Under the effect of the latter's sustained magic power, the 4 carried bombs weighed only a fifth of their usual weight as long as they did not detach from each other. This type of enchantment was a new method discovered by Hummingbird while she was cultivating her mastery of magic power. By maintaining the effect for a very short period of time, she could alter the weight of multiple connected objects and reduce the expenditure of magic. Lightning easily caught up with the bomb and guided it towards the mangonel situated on one side of the city gate. Halfway through the air, the young girl perceived the fear in the eyes of the knights standing on top of the city wall. They raised their crossbows and flintlocks, and fired towards the sky to shoot her down. However, she knew that it was difficult enough for them to hit a bird flying freely in the sky, not to mention that most weapons did not have sufficient range to hit her at her current distance. Subsequently, the bomb hit the mangonel right on, and following a huge boom, a blazing red fireball lit up at once and swelled rapidly. The nearby guards were unable to dodge it in time and were instantly devoured by the flames. As violent blasts swept across the city wall, the oil boilers toppled and were quickly ignited. The blazes followed the spill flow of the hot oil and ignited the explosives that were placed at one corner. Explosions followed one after another, destroying everything in the vicinity and filling the place with nothing but flames and thick smoke. The knights, who were preparing for battle just a while ago, hastily fled in all directions. Many lost their direction in the thick smoke and fell straight down the city wall. Others floundered about in the sea of fire or rolled on the floor to put out the flames on their bodies. The top of the city wall had turned into hell on earth. "Their defense line has collapsed," commented Sylvie. She was observing the billows of thick smoke on the city wall, with a trace of pity in her expression. "These people deserve it," added Nightingale, who was expressionless. "If we failed, they would have become even worse. Someone has to pay the price in this battle." "If it isn't them, it's us," Roland opined, while pretending to be calm. He then beckoned to Iron Axe behind him. "Blow the horn and order the seizure of this city." He did not want to lament the cruelty of war or expound the value of peace at this time. Above a fight for power or a battle for survival, this was a collision of ideas and classes. Whenever a backward class was displaced, it would not leave the stage quietly, but rather, it needed to be sent off with a huge amount of bloodshed. To Roland, it was always better that the blood was spilt by the enemies. "As you command, Your Highness." The latter bowed neatly and departed the ship. Soon, the signal for the general offensive resounded through the pier area. As a member of the 4th Commando, Nail's target was to destroy the palace gate. As the platoon entered the inner city, its advance was abruptly impeded. Here, they faced a strong counterattack from the enemy. "Edgar's injured, carry him down quickly." F***CK, where's the field artillery? "They are blocked off by debris and have to detour." "Prepare the weapons. These monsters are charging right up." Nail slapped his own cheek forcefully before he filled a cartridge with bullets and handed it to a teammate in front of him. A volley of rifle fire sounded, puncturing thousands of holes in the crazed people charging at them. Blood splattered all over as they fell to the ground. Those who followed behind continued to pounce at the commandos recklessly. They did not slow down even if their arms, abdomens, or other body parts had been struck. These were certainly not militiamen. Nail felt his limbs become numb. The enemies were wearing either half-plates or chain armors and wielded excellent weapons, with everything from swords to crossbows. He had heard from the knowledgeable John that only the king's guards possessed such a complete range of equipment. Unfortunately for John, his knowledge was not able to protect him at last. During a previous assault by the enemy, he was critically impaled by a bolt that was shot at him from sideways. Hope he can persevere until Miss Angel arrives. "Retreat, the 4th Commando, retreat. The 3 squads are ready to fire." The veterans, with no concern about economizing their use of bullets, shot precisely at their targets. In one breath, they emptied their cartridges and immediately retreated to the back line, so as to shorten the time interval between the suppression fires. 5 commando teams took turns to shield the others along the main street. This was the first time that Nail had seen this method of taking turns to fire ever since revolving rifles replaced flintlocks. However, their enemies did not attack from only one direction. Suddenly, a platoon of crazed people leapt at them from a streetside house. Before most of the veterans could turn their guns, the platoon was already in their midst. Screams and curse were heard at once. Nail watched helplessly as a teammate was cut into half by a red-eyed guard right in front of him. Although the guard was shortly struck dead by the other teammates, Nail knew that this particular teammate could not be resuscitated even by Miss Angel herself. "Where are those bastard artillerymen? Help me! Ouch, my legs! Continue firing." As he heard his captain screaming instructions, Nail gritted his teeth and used his sleeve to wipe off the blood stains on a cartridge. He picked up a gun on the floor and reloaded it with the cartridge. Then, he aimed at an enemy who was tussling with his teammates and pulled the trigger. Although he was afraid, the trainings that he had attended reminded him constantly that while facing a strong opponent, It was necessary to stick closely with his platoon and make use of the team's collective strength in order to have a chance of survival. Just then, Nail heard the loud call of a support unit from behind him. "The artillery battalion has run into trouble on East Street. Lord Brian has sent us to assist you. No matter who you people are, hurry forth," the captain cried out without looking back once. The support unit pulled 2 carts up the street. Noticeably, the weapons equipped on the carts were none other than Mark I type HMG. When their shooting positions were fixed, the guns discharged long rows of fire at the new wave of charging crazed army. Chapter 506, No one could escape. In an instant, a cloud of dust and ashes sprang up from the street. As soon as the crack sounds of shooting began, the enemies stopped dead in their tracks and appeared to burst into plumes of blood. The dense hail of bullets seemed to form an invisible wall that blocked the forward motion from the drugged soldiers. "Nicely done. Die, monsters, die." Nail clasped his hands in excitement. Sparks flew off the enemy's armor as they were bombarded by the heavy machine guns. Compared with revolvers, heavy machine guns were much more efficient and powerful. They were able to kill a man with just a single shot to the head or chest, and they could easily cause severe injuries to limbs as well. A revolver could barely stop someone from attacking. Best of all, there was no interval between each shot of the heavy machine guns. The target would likely be hit even if several shots missed their mark. Strands of white smoke escaped from the muzzles of the guns and drifted into the air after the sounds of shooting died down. Unable to compete with the heavy machine guns, the crazed army retreated in a panic, leaving numerous bodies behind. Those who sustained critical injuries from the bullets were lying on the ground moaning and wailing, having completely lost their ability to fight, much less drag themselves from harm's way. Nail caught sight of the terror in their eyes. "Guns in the air!" the unit leader shouted aloud. Thinking of the comrade who was violently slashed in half right in front of him, Nail coolly raised his rifle without the slightest hesitation. The army was finally able to march forward after the road had been cleared. When the 5 commandos arrived at the palace gate, they immediately circled out a shooting field as instructed during the training, while at the same time monitored the movements on the streets. To prevent a pincer attack from the enemies, the army responsible for taking the inner city was divided into 3 wings. Each wing would march along one of the 3 main streets and serve as a flank for another. In this way, the First Army would be able to defend against enemies coming from all directions. However, Nail noticed the real combat was far more complicated than the training. The South Street was devoured by the flames, and it was almost impossible for them to pass. His own troops, on the other hand, were hindered by the crushed stones and became scattered as the battle progressed. Meanwhile, the soldiers were overwhelmed by the extent of the counterattacks they encountered, and they had completely forgotten to watch for the flag signals from Miss Lightning. A commando that should have belonged to his wing was missing, and gunshots could be heard everywhere in the inner city. Fortunately, they were the first wing to arrive at the gathering place. An hour later, the other wings trickled into the palace gate one after another, slowly followed by the field artilleries. The hot air balloon once again appeared above the palace. As the 4 bombs burned the garden wall and the iron gate to the ground, the final storming of the fortified castle began. "Your Majesty, they're already at the palace gate. Please, run for your life." Osborne, the imperial bodyguard, urged in anxiety. "There isn't much time left." Timothy silently sat at the bedside in his bedroom, completely motionless. This was exactly where his father had taken his own life many years ago. Now it appeared to be his turn. He had usurped the power of Prince Gerald, his biggest rival, by making him a scapegoat for the death of King Wimbledon III, and he had thereby ascended the throne. Within 1 year after becoming king, he had unified the eastern and northern regions in succession, driven away Garcia, his 3rd sister, and quickly became the most powerful man in the country. He had thought it would be just a matter of time before he occupied the western region and unified the whole kingdom of Grey Castle. However, he had not expected that the situation would suddenly take a turn for the worse. The turn was so sudden and severe that he was caught fully unprepared. First, the crazed army had failed its mission to attack and conquer border town. Afterwards, the unexpected explosion had further shaken his confidence. In a matter of 3 days, all of his advantages were gone. When he received the message from Redwater City, he had never thought there would be only 3 days to prepare. The snow in the northern region had yet to melt, and it was still too early to start conscription since farmers were busy with the spring plowing. He immediately sent a letter to the new duke in the eastern region for help, but it was likely that the duke would just now be receiving the letter and probably had yet to read its contents. In the end, he was forced to fight against the enemies in haste. He had the help of many well-trained fighters including knights in King's City, the mercenaries, the patrol team, and the guards and squires of the nobles nearby. Nevertheless, to his astonishment, the towering city wall that he had put so much faith in simply collapsed on the very first day of the battle. Son of AB*TCH. Timothy suddenly picked up the candelabrum on the nightstand and smashed it to the floor with all his strength. You damn bastard. How can you ever defeat me if you haven't colluded with the witches and surrendered to the demons? Your Majesty. Yes, the demons. There was a tinge of dryness and tremor in his furious howl. The church is crap. They promised to kill the witches, but instead they have decided to just let Roland Wimbledon go. If it isn't the aid from witches, what else has made his firearms so much more powerful than mine? What else has enabled him to easily attack from above? I have far more laborers and alchemists, and I'm hundreds of times wealthier than he is. There's only one possible explanation: the demons in hell are helping him. 2 explosions went off below the palace, and the glass windows started to rattle. He could hear muted yelling outside. This was the sound of his guards' last attempts to hold off the enemy. No, I can't die. Timothy thought resentfully. It would be too kind of me to commit suicide now. My brother is the one that should go to hell. Let's get into the secret tunnel. He tried to stand up, but his legs were too shaky to support his weight. The guard stepped in and grabbed his arm to steady him. Yes, Your Majesty. Osborne was relieved. He carried Timothy on his back and asked the guards at the door to join them. They walked toward the hearth together. The secret tunnel had both a trapdoor and a fixed gate. Once the fixed gate was shut, the entrance of the tunnel would be blocked permanently. The underground maze was filled with God's stones of retaliation and hidden traps. Due to the complexity of the tunnel's structure, Timothy had not yet had a chance to fully explore it. It was possible that the tunnel existed even before the construction of the palace. When the group of 6 arrived at a large lounge area in the tunnel, Timothy ordered that they halted and asked them to take a rest while they waited for a chance to escape. Although the tunnel had many exits, with the farthest one leading to the outer city, it was still very risky to plunge into action in the broad daylight. Timothy clearly remembered that Roland had a witch who could carry gunpowder to the sky. The safest option was to wait until it was dark and quiet before exiting the tunnel. Given that the tunnel was fully protected by God's stones, it was impossible for witches to sneak in. Your Majesty, since we won't set out until midnight, please take a nap here. The imperial bodyguard took out a blanket from the chest and unrolled it on the ground. Timothy lay down. His brows furrowed when he smelled the damp, musty blanket. Feeling anxious and lost, Timothy could hardly fall asleep. Where should I go next? The northern region or the eastern region? There were nobles who supported him in both areas, and the dukes there were newly assigned. However, would they still be obedient once they learned that King's City had fallen? Or, the church? As soon as the idea of turning to the church for help crossed his mind, the thought was stuck and would not leave. Anyway, all those great nobles were just hangers-on. Even if they knew his brother was in collusion with the witches, they would still knuckle down to Roland upon threats and duress, just as the nobles in Longsong's stronghold. Yet the church. The church claimed that they would not tolerate a single witch, and they would certainly not tolerate a noble who supported a great number of them. Although these church scoundrels were conceited and foolish, at least they were not too stupid to condone the demons and allow them to spread their power in the kingdom of Greycastle so scrupulously. If the church could support him, he would even be willing to sacrifice the kingdom of his fathers. Until he could send Roland Wimbledon to the guillotine and torture those damn witches to death, he would never give up. In the dim torchlight, Timothy made up his mind. After midnight, the group of people fled King City via the longest passage of the tunnel. They exited the tunnel and quietly made their way through the outskirts of town. However, they had yet to cover half a mile before the surrounding fields were suddenly lit up by hundreds of torches. "Your Majesty, run!" Osborne's words stopped abruptly on the tip of his tongue. There was no need for any explanation at this moment. The enemies had apparently planned out everything long before. They launched a perfect ambush and encircled the six of them, blocking all possible exits through which they could flee for their lives. Timothy's heart turned cold. He knew there was no escape. Chapter 507, The Wind-Up. "Your Majesty, the road to the palace has been cleaned up, and the city is yours now," Iron Axe exclaimed in excitement as he knelt before Roland. "The battle started yesterday and did not end until early this morning. After entering the city, the First Army only spent 4 hours to complete their two main missions, seizing the palace in the inner city and taking the great church in the east. The next steps would be to clear out the enemies and eliminate Timothy's resistance." Roland glanced around and noticed that everyone was exhilarated. The soldiers in the First Army and the witches were in high spirits. If he had made the official announcement, they would have probably been cheering for victory, but he had not yet. After Timothy's rule had been overturned, he was the king of the kingdom of Grey Castle even without a coronation ceremony. However, Roland felt surprisingly calm and peaceful. This magnificent capital city, the political and economic center of the kingdom of Grey Castle, did not resonate with him, nor did he feel belong to its soil. To Roland, it was simply an ordinary city, even less developed than Longsong Stronghold. The only thing that delighted him was that the chaos created by the royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince had finally come to an end. Now he could concentrate on the development of his territory. Having said that, it was still a victory, a significant triumph. Roland believed by the time the news spread throughout the kingdom, he would have built a greater reputation and gained more booming authority in the country. Subsequently, he could use his influence to recruit more talents and further the reforms. The plan for the spring offensive that he had been preparing for the last 4 months was half completed. The only territory yet to be conquered was the south. Roland looked toward where Fallen Dragon Ridge and the farther southernmost region lay. That was the territory he had to seize. He took a deep breath, put the thought behind him. "Let's enter the city," he announced. "Yes, Your Majesty." Iron Axe stood up with great respect and delivered his command to the guarding soldiers who had been eagerly waiting for instruction. "Column of twos, protect your new king and advance." The soldiers raised their weapons in unison and shouted, "Long live King Wimbledon! Long live His Majesty!" Roland stepped off the warship and set out for the palace. There were few people on the streets when the army entered the city gate. Traces of the fight could still be seen, more in the areas close to the palace than anywhere else. In the inner city, he saw property destruction, traffic barriers, broken limbs, and bloodstains everywhere. Although the First Army was able to occupy the palace in a short time, it was the most intense battle they had ever come across. Roland's heart ached when he saw the ruins on both sides of the street. The casualties were still unknown. However, there had been more than 20 soldiers' bodies sent to the rear, despite the fact that Nana had come to rescue in a timely fashion. If the little girl had not offered to help, the number would have been at least 3 times higher. When Roland entered the palace area, the guards knelt down. 2 columns of soldiers neatly lined up on their knees along the road leading to the castle. Such a scene was rarely seen among the First Army, where military salutation was commonly administered. Roland did not stop them. He could tell from their thrilled looks that these people were not greeting him as a military member, but were paying their respects to the new king as subjects of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. As Roland passed through the green castle garden, an old memory from childhood suddenly struck him. 3 blue stone edifices arranged in a triangular shape surrounded the aquatic garden. It was where the Wimbledons had been living for generations. On the left stood the Hall of Sky Dome, where banquets and ceremonies were often held. Unfortunately, it had been completely destroyed by a bomb, save the 10 soaring stone pillars. On the right lay the city hall and the library, both of which were guarded by the First Army at the moment. In the middle stood the most magnificent holy temple of double towers. Its structure was similar to that of skyscrapers in the modern world, with an oval 3-story podium building as its base. It was even bigger than the castle area in Border Town. On either side of the podium building was a lofty tower. One tower was shaped like a king's crown, the other a queen's, both representing the supreme power of the royal family. In the center of the double towers hung 2 crossed iron cables, representing the 2 guns on the Cayman. Both the design of the architecture and the theory behind it were masterpieces that could go down in history and remain immortal. Roland stepped onto the long spiral staircase and entered the holy temple. It was strange that he knew every single chamber and hallway here, despite this being his first visit. In the temple, aside from the armed soldiers, there was also a group of fidgeting nobles. When Roland went in, they all knelt to greet him. "Please rise." Roland enthroned himself as a matter of course and surveyed them from above. He caught sight of several familiar faces among the nobles: Lauren Moore, Treasurer; Bullet Flynn, Minister for Diplomacy; Pala, Minister of Justice; Marshall, Director of Intelligence; Marquis Wyke, Prime Minister, etc. These people used to work for King Wimbledon III, and some of their family histories could even be traced back to the time when the Wimbledon family settled in. When Timothy Wimbledon had succeeded to the throne, they had all pledged allegiance to the new king. Now, they apparently planned to play the same trick on him according to the usual practice. Unfortunately for them, Roland did not need them. This was not a negotiation but a trial. Timothy Wimbledon is suspected of the murder of Prince Gerald, treason, as well as collusion with the church. He's now been taken into custody and will be subject to severe punishment. Soon his conviction will be publicized and known by the whole country. Do you want to say anything about it? These are all capital offenses. I once tried to stop him but failed. Marquis Wyke ventured first. You've driven away a plague on the kingdom of Grey Castle, Your Majesty. All the other nobles chimed in. Really? Roland sneered. When he was committing these crimes, were you standing with folded arms or holding a candle to the devil? Don't tell me that you tried to stop him with your vain persuasions. Well, the Marquis frowned. Your Majesty, you don't know the real situation. Timothy promoted a lot of his loyal followers, such as Lanry, Scar, and Marquis Morris, after he took charge. We could command neither the knights nor the conscripted army. Yes, Your Majesty. That was indeed the truth. He didn't even try Prince Gerald before sending him to the guillotine. Pala coughed while defending himself. The executor was also a knight. We couldn't stop him. So, you're saying that everything that happened this year had nothing to do with you? Roland despised these ministers even more. They were not handy assistants to the king, but rather a group of bloodsuckers feeding on the benefits granted by the royal family, only caring about their own interests. Perhaps, these aristocratic ministers had been of great help to the king when the kingdom of Grey Castle had initially been founded, but they had gone downhill in the past few hundred years. Well, since you insist on your innocence, let's play a game. Game? All of them were taken by surprise. A trial game where I question and you answer. Roland's eyes flitted across each of the nobles. There are 10 questions in total. You'll be out of the game if you lie. Remember, you only have one chance to answer each question. Chapter 508, The Game. Your Majesty, I don't understand. Marquis Wyke wiped the sweats from his forehead. What do you mean by out of the game? Those who are out will either be hanged, banished from the kingdom, or sentenced to heavy labor in the mines. Or, perhaps, all of their assets will be confiscated. The prince explained airily. The rules of the game conform to the royal laws. It's fair enough. No, I've served the royal family faithfully since the reign of your father. You can't. But now I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. Roland interrupted him and continued. don't panic. Those who have answered all of the 10 questions correctly will get promoted or rewarded. It'd be boring if there were only punishments and no rewards, right? I can't accept this, said Sir Pala, shaking his head. Those punishments you've mentioned should only be ordered by the court. We can't take such serious things so lightly. Your Majesty, I'm sorry I feel uneasy. Please allow me to take my leave. He turned around and tried to exit the room, only to find that the door had been closed and that there were 2 expressionless soldiers now standing by the door. They blocked his exit and would not budge. I'm not asking for your opinion, Sir Pala, said Roland, and, if you insist on quitting the game, I'm afraid I'll have to add one more punishment. He made a gesture as if shooting a gun and added, that is, to shoot you. The frightened nobles opened their eyes wide and spontaneously stepped back a few paces, while the soldiers around them lifted up their guns and calmly looked at them. So, now, time for the game. Roland stood up and clapped his hands. The first question, did you get involved in the matter of forcing refugees to invade the western region? Let's start with you, Mr. Prime Minister. After a moment of silence, Marquis Wyke said, I did follow Timothy's order to recruit refugees from the eastern region and the southern territory, but I did not take part in the other matter you stated. He felt Nightingale lightly pinch his right shoulder. I'm sorry. I told you that you'd only have one chance to answer each question honestly. Roland waved his hand. Take him down to the jail beneath this hall. Your Majesty, what I said is true. No, you and I both know that you're still lying, even now. Roland promptly rejected the Prime Minister's appeal. He watched him get dragged out into the hallway and then slowly said to everyone, if you're smart, you'll understand that lying won't do you any good, because, I can tell whether or not you're telling me the truth. The nobles all stood with mouths agape, and no one dared to speak. If nobody volunteers to answer the question, I'll just call out names. Roland looked at the Minister of Justice and said, what about you? Sir Pala. It had turned out just the way he had wanted. This was a trial. He had to cut the Gordian knot by efficiently dealing with the nobles here in this matter. As he also had to handle the situation with the area to the south of Fallen Dragon Ridge, he could not afford to waste too much time here. The post-war city management would be transferred to the personnel trained by the city hall, and the resistance they would meet was from the local nobles and Blackstreet gangs. Given that he needed the city to smoothly get back to normal and that now there was not enough time and energy left for a long screening, he held the trial to quickly remove the guilty nobles who had worked in collusion with Timothy and to pick out the clean, honest nobles to work with. As for the Blackstreet problem, he would leave them to Theo. After all, the purpose of the surprise attack was to prevent Timothy from using ordinary people to wage a meaningless, long-lasting war. If he were to just step away from the city after overturning Timothy's rule and leave the city in chaos, he would be no different from their previous king. He did not plan to absorb King City into his kingdom, nor did he want to find another agent to run the city for him. After a whole year of hard work and development, he just did not have the strength. No matter to act against the noble or the church, he had the ability to beat them. Now, the last question, have you ever bullied or oppressed the people, including witches? After asking 9 questions, less than 10 out of the over 50 still remained in the hall. Such a high outing rate did not shock Roland at all, as he knew for sure Timothy had already kicked the incapable ones out of the palace. They were the people who either thought he usurped the throne or questioned the cause of King Wimbledon III's death. However, what did surprise Roland was that there were still 7 nobles working in the city hall who had nothing to do with either Timothy's schemes or the church. Your Majesty, I'm guilty, said a noble, falling to his knees and sweating profusely. I've ordered my men to beat up a civilian because he smeared my trousers with his feet. I failed to hold back my anger at that time but I just beat him. I did not kill him. I had a secret love affair with a shop owner's daughter, but she seduced me first. My housekeeper slept with my wife while I was out hunting. I cut off his penis straight away instead of sending him to the court. But, Your Majesty, a housekeeper doesn't count, right? Roland did his best to keep a straight face while hearing those various, funny answers. Those trifles were not considered misdeeds or even mistakes by nobles usually, but now they were apparently so frightened by the questioning that they spat out all those things in fear that it would be regarded as lying. After they had all given their answers, Roland cleared his throat and asked, "Is there anything else?" "No," the nobles said. When Nightingale pinched his left shoulder, he finally nodded and said, "Congratulations, you've passed." The nobles were greatly relieved. "I did say that the winners of the game would be rewarded. Trust me, I'll keep my word, especially when there are so many vacancies in the city hall, but I still have one question." Roland looked at the two people standing at the back of the room, who seemed to have never broken any laws since they hadn't said anything but no in reply for every question, and their answers were all approved by Nightingale. "What are your names and positions in the city hall?" "I'm Alva Tabor, your majesty," one of them replied, "and I'm in charge of the issues related to the star image." Blanche Orlando, the other person, a woman, said, "I'm the ceremonial officer." "That's the reason. People in positions like theirs don't get many chances to do bad things. These two are indeed the only ones with clean hands in the city hall." Roland went back to the throne and said, "You can leave the palace now. I'll send for you after I straighten up a few things with my family." He paused and added, "My way of ruling will be very different from my father's and Timothy's. You'll see that soon enough, and remember what got you through the game. Keep it up. This isn't going to be the last game you play." The nobles withdrew submissively, and then Roland left the hall and headed to the basement with Nightingale, thinking to himself, "Time to meet my dear brother. Chapter 509, To Become a King. The dungeon of the palace was a childhood nightmare for Prince Roland. The feeling naturally came back to him as he was walking down the stone steps. He started to search his memories and soon found the reason for this fear. One day, Timothy invited Gerald, Garcia, and little Roland to explore the basement of the basement under the palace hall together. The 12-year-old Roland had been so excited to finally get the chance to join their inner circle but had never expected what would happen next. Timothy had stolen the keys from the guards, locked Ronald into a jail cell and left with the other two kids while laughing. Little Roland was left alone in the dark room. He had thought of the shrilling cries he occasionally heard throughout the hall. A guard had once told him that the cries were from wailing ghosts in the underground world beneath the palace. His teeth chattered with fright, but he had not dared to cry out loud since he had been afraid of attracting the ghosts to him. At last, he huddled up in a corner, held his knees and pressed his face against them, sobbing uncontrollably. When Timothy, Gerald, and Garcia returned to check how terrible he was, his face had been covered with his snot. After that, Prince Roland had been too frightened to step back into the basement of the palace. Roland now understood that the wails and shrills did not come from ghosts, but from the prisoners being questioned and tortured in the basement. The jail could not hold many prisoners, which explained why little Roland had only been able to hear them every now and then. Roland met Timothy Wimbledon in a small cell on the bottom floor of the basement. Compared with the jails in the outer and inner city, the place was pretty good. At least, it was dry and clean, without rats, cockroaches, or stinky smells. This was the exact cell where the little Roland had been locked into and cried for an entire night. Ironically, now Timothy swapped positions with Ronald. Hearing unexpected noises, Timothy, who sat silently against the wall, opened his eyes and saw Roland. This brother, that Prince Roland had feared the most in the past, looked almost the same as before. Like all the other descendants of the Wimbledon family, he was gray-eyed and gray-haired. He resembled his father in appearance in that he wore short curly hair and had his father's nose and handsome face. However, his long, narrow eyes made his face a little ghastly, especially in the flickering torchlight. Prince Roland had never dared to look into his brother's eyes before, but now, Timothy was just a helpless and defenseless stranger. They looked at each other for a while, during which nothing could be heard except the burning sounds of torches. Finally, Timothy was unable to veil his gaunt face any longer and gave up trying to overwhelm Roland with an aggressive attitude, for he found that it was useless now. The look in Timothy's eyes changed, and somehow he seemed to be terrified. "Who the hell are you?" Timothy broke the silence. His dry, emotional voice reverberated in the basement, from which Roland could easily tell that his brother was scared. Compared with Tilly, Timothy had had more interactions with Prince Roland and contributed a lot to his previous annoying and fickle behaviors. He felt that it was natural for Timothy, who had known Prince Roland quite well in the past, to spot something different in Ronald now and ask that question. "I'm Roland Wimbledon," Ronald said as he had squatted down until his face was level with Timothy's and looked into his eyes. "You can't remember me?" "No, you're not him," Timothy said in a trembling voice. "He could never look at me like this. He dared not look directly into my eyes." He heavily panted and continued, "I know. You're the real demon. You're not lured by demons. You're evil incarnate, wanting to steal my kingdom." Roland did not even want to bother explaining anything to a dying man like Timothy. Ronald said, "So what? You think you're better than the demons? You killed our father, framed our innocent elder brother and then executed him to keep the throne you stole. You collaborated with the church, who our father hated the most. You compelled innocent people to invade the domain of Princess Garcia, and you can't even spare your weakest and most powerless brother Prince Roland. In only 1 year, you conquered and destroyed so many cities, dragging the whole kingdom into chaos and making the people homeless. Even the demons wouldn't do this." Timothy hurriedly refuted, "No. I didn't kill our father. He killed himself. Just like you, he was controlled by demons." "Suicide?" Roland asked, frowning. "Yes. He lay in the bed as usual and drove a dagger into his heart with a smile on his face." Timothy answered. "Not the witches?" Ronald questioned. "No, he wore God's stone of retaliation." "Damn it," Timothy shouted hoarsely and added in a choked voice, "it just happened without any warning and I couldn't stop it at all." Roland looked back at Nightingale, who slightly nodded to him. It must have been an attaching magic witch. Once she performed her magic power, she would not be affected by God's stone, Roland thought, and unlike witches from other organizations, the pure witches of the church could possibly find a chance to get close to the king. Prince Ronald quickly recalled an incident that happened half a year ago when they were evacuating refugees. A witch tricked her way into the camps to assassinate Wendy by her ability to change her appearance. Connecting that incident to what had happened to King Wimbledon III, he thought the answer was clear. If the church was the creator of those incidents, it could also explain the reason for the royal decree on the selection of crown prince, which clearly aimed at creating wars and chaos. He still needed somebody to testify this speculation and believed he would get something out of the high priest of the king's city. "But this can't be the justification of framing Gerald and expanding the war," Roland said in a deep voice. "You conspired with the church and used the pills of madness to create crazed soldiers. Have you ever thought that how many people would die of this? Even if I didn't use the pills, who could guarantee that Garcia wouldn't use them? If they recognized me as the legitimate king at first, why would I destroy them mercilessly?" Timothy explained as he crawled to hold the railings. "And what do all these have to do with a demon like you? How the hell do you want to deal with me?" "I want to expose your crimes, judge you and then send you to the guillotine. You'll end up like Gerald, except that you're proven guilty of unpardonable crimes for which even death penalty is not enough to serve the justice," Ronald said. "No. You can't kill me. Demons like you can never stand in the light, since powerful deities will wipe you out. If you want the kingdom of Grey Castle, you have to rely on me." Timothy yelled. "Deities?" Roland grinned. "You mean the church? You don't know them. The church's hidden strength is unfathomable. There are incredible things Father had written down in his notes, and they're the reason why he could not make up his mind to banish the church in his life." Timothy cried out. "Pills are just one of their formidable methods. If they uncover your identity, there'll be no escape for you." "No, Timothy Wimbledon. I know much more than you think I do, and I've got a clear idea of the road ahead. It's a hard road and you don't have the ability to lead the people to a bright future," Roland said slowly. "Your life must end here for the crimes you committed. But, relax, you aren't the only one who is going to hell." With those words, Ronald stood up and walked out of the jail, leaving Timothy to cry alone without even turning his head. Chapter 510, The Flower of Revenge. When he entered the basement of the palace, Hill Fox felt his heart tremble, not out of fear, but rather uncontrollable excitement. The flickering flame of the torch seemed to dance for him, while his steps echoed praises off the stone floor. He never felt the dark, quiet basement could be so wonderful. After arriving at the ground floor of the basement, Theo searched his body again. He then patted his shoulder and whispered, "Go, and don't stay too long." Hill nodded and walked excitedly into the darkness ahead. After a while, as he passed through a darkened walkway and approached the cage, he slowed down so he could fully savor this memorable moment. He then saw the murderer who killed his wife. Timothy Wimbledon. At that moment, Hill covered his mouth, as his eyes were filled with tears. Everything that he had done before was not in vain, and the outcome came earlier than he expected. My wife would smile at this sight, he thought. "Who is it?" Timothy asked. He turned around, leaned against the rails, and he desperately asked, "Is that you, demon? Did you change your mind?" Hill came out of the shadows and paced to the cage. Timothy was shocked and then became wary. He moved 2 steps back. "Who are you? Who let you in? Where is Roland Wimbledon? I want to see him." This was the formerly haughty king. Hill had only seen what Timothy looked like from a distance in the ascending ceremony. At that time, he wore a crimson robe, a shining and noble crown, and he held a golden scepter in his hand. Surrounded by the knights of King City, he walked to the high platform step by step and accepted the coronation. Hill once hoped that he would become a good king who would give everyone a stable life, but the later raid tore the whole city, the acrobatic troupe, and the families apart. As a result, all these expectations for the future disappeared. Now, he finally felt the sweetness of revenge. It did not contain any pity for this enemy or emptiness after success. Instead, all he felt was just sweetness and happiness, which warmed his cold heart again. To his surprise, he found he actually was fond of this kind of feeling. "I'm Hill Fox, Your Majesty," Hill said as he bowed. "I'm a member of Dove and Cylinder, and it's impossible for you to know me, but I know you." Timothy was stone-faced and speechless. Hill did not care at all, however, and continued, "There should have been 7 members in this acrobatic troupe, but we lost a partner because of you. Since then, the 6 of us left no longer focused on performing, but we hid among the rats and hotels to inquire about your movements. After that, we organized and analyzed the information and sent it to Lord Roland." He paused, and then said, "By the way, we told him about your plan of developing snow powder and impressing militiamen to invade the western region. We also made the 2 saltpeter factories in the suburbs close down and transferred them to other places." "What are you talking about?" Timothy squinted and said, "A hidden traitor who is proud of what he has done? A traitor who betrayed his king and reaped the benefits of betraying his dignity? I don't know anything about the Dove and Cylinder at all." "Stop your tricks, you lowlife. Benefit? Betrayer? No. Your Majesty, I just followed my heart," Hill said quietly. "That partner is my wife. She died in your witch-hunting campaign. In prison, she was tortured and insulted, but the ultimate punishment for the murderer was just 25 silver royals." Timothy's eyes glittered. "Do you remember now?" Hill spread his hands and added, "Although the city hall later gave 3 gold royals as compensation, it actually means nothing to me. My wife will never come back. She was not a witch, but she died because of you." After a while, Timothy said, "I didn't do it." This rather weak answer was as sweet as honey. Usually, this response would have been met by a sneer and a "so what?" At the time, Lanry, who executed the arrest, was your henchman. Even Steelheart Knight couldn't stop him. "I just wanted a fair verdict, but the court and the city hall rejected my appeal. There's no doubt that you were behind this." "No, enough. You lowlife." Timothy could not help but roar, "Do you know what you're doing? If that witch-hunting campaign only wronged your wife, what you've done will ruin the kingdom of Grey Castle." "Lord Roland? You idiot. Roland Wimbledon has been dead for a long time. Your master is a real demon. You decided to serve a demon just for a woman? Is that so? Hill asked, raising the corners of his mouth. When I begged the gods, there wasn't any response. At that moment, I swore that as long as I could get my revenge, even if he was a demon, I'd follow him to hell. He bowed with his hand on his chest and said, "Goodbye, Your Majesty. I'm much honored to have aided in your destruction." When he returned to the basement's entrance, Theo nodded toward Hill. "Are you satisfied?" "Yes, Your Excellency, please take me to see His Majesty Roland," Hill said, as he took a deep breath. On the third floor of the palace, he finally saw the man whom he had served for the past 6 months. Roland Wimbledon looked much kinder than Timothy. Although they had the same gray hair and gray pupils, he did not have the arrogant temperament that kept people at arm's length. He did not even look like a royal nobleman. "I'm very grateful for your undercover work in King City," said Roland. Hill was also surprised by his first sentence. "Thanks to your intelligence, I could prepare everything to conquer King City at the lowest cost." "Don't mention it, and I was doing what was right." "Certainly, I know you did that for revenge. Timothy will soon have his due verdict. Now that you have what you want, you can start a new life, but I hope that you can continue to work for me." Roland got up, walked in front of him, and looked at him. "There is still much to do to help the city restore stability and even return to its past prosperity. For example, rats need to be controlled, and the restless noblemen also need to be watched, but Theo won't be able to cope with these tasks alone. What do you think? The members of your acrobatic troupe and you can work in a secret and formal position to protect the people of the city from a similar tragedy." "I'd love to, Your Majesty," Hill said and solemnly knelt down. "Even if you didn't say so, I'd still follow you forever. You fulfilled what you promised before, and now it's my turn to do so," he said slowly. "The rest of Hillfox's life will belong to you." The flower of revenge finally bore its most delicious fruit. Chapter 511, Whispers at Nightfall. Nightingale lay by the window and watched the city under the night sky. Dim shadows spread under the darkness and outlined the silhouette of King City's wall. Under the light, the 3 walls showed some minor differences. The nearest palace wall was a light gray color, lit up by burning resin torches. At a glance, it looked like a jeweled belt with overlapping areas of light and dark. Far away was the inner city wall, which was gray mixed with black, and it looked like a long snake that surrounded the city. Even after King City had a new ruler, the inner city still kept its splendor. It was the first time that Nightingale saw a place busier and livelier than Border Town. This short, yet fierce war did not have any effects on the noble and the rich, so they still joyfully indulged themselves at night. However, beyond that, the sky was suddenly darker as if all the light was blocked by the inner city's wall. The darkness covered everything including the most splendid bluestone city wall, where Nightingale saw only some stones sparkle from the moon's light. The outer city just looked like most of the cities she had seen before. These cities fell into silence after the night came. In the vast darkness, the inner city's light seemed a bit dull, but it did not stop people from dancing and singing. For some reason, Nightingale suddenly thought about how human beings were cornered into this part of the continent, and the vast land of dawn was being devoured by the darkness bit by bit. There were demons and evil beasts that lurked about, but most people had no idea and still partook in what little entertainment they had. "Phew, I'm beyond tired." Wendy's voice interrupted Nightingale's thoughts, as the red-headed witch rubbed her shoulders and lay down next to Nightingale by the window. Nightingale asked, "Have they fallen asleep already?" "Yes. They finally got tired after all the commotion they've stirred up today." Wendy yawned. "I don't know where their energy comes from. They flew around on hydrogen balloons the entire day and still they demanded to hear a story before going to bed." Wendy finished. "You should thank His Majesty for that." Nightingale laughed. "If he didn't punish them to do 3 sets of exercises, I'm afraid they'd go out to explore the night instead of listening to your story." Nightingale turned around to look through the gap between the balcony and the bedroom and saw Maggie leaned over Lightning. Maggie's white hair almost covered Lightning's entire body. Those two seemed to really hit it off. Nightingale expressed. Since the rooms in the royal palace were more spacious and each living room was accompanied by 2 bedrooms. The witches that followed Roland on this expedition lived in 4-person rooms with each other. These rooms were the most splendid places in the whole kingdom of Grey Castle. The carpets and bedding in the guest rooms were all made of excellent materials, some of which Nightingale recognized, like velvet and silk. Other things were made of materials she had never seen before. Yes. Wendy also smiled gently. I heard from Lady Tilly once that Maggie used to turn into a pigeon and slept while squatted on the roof. Any little noise would wake her and she only kept pigeon form to escape any possible dangers. Now, she finally can have a peaceful sleep just like a normal little girl. She paused for a while and then continued, her voice filled with emotion, we're very lucky. Nightingale did not answer her. She did not need to. All the Witch Cooperation Association's witches who survived would feel the same way. When they struggled between life and death, it was the Lord of Border Town who reached out to them and promised them a new world. Now, not only did their sisters see hope, but they also found that this new world was within reach. After the Holy Mountain, they pursued for hundreds of years, became a reality, their gratitude and recognition could not be expressed within a few words. They fell into a long silence until the midnight bell ranged from far away, and Wendy said, do you want to go back and have a visit? Nightingale asked confused, go back to where? She still was not fully awakened. Silver City, your hometown, Wendy pointed south and said, it's only half a day's journey from here. If you let Maggie carry you, it won't even take an hour. You do have a little brother living there, right? Nightingale did not think she would bring this up, and after a little hesitation, she shook her head and explained, while we restore the city's order, there are potential enemies everywhere. So I can't leave His Majesty now. Besides, when everything in the Kingdom of Grey Castle is settled, I'll have many opportunities to visit Silver City. There is no hurry. I thought you'd emphasize that you've already removed yourself from the Guyland family, just like you did in the past, Wendy said relieved, you seem like you don't hate your little brother anymore? Without his betrayal, I wouldn't have met you, let alone His Highness. Nightingale smiled. You always say to me, getting rid of the past nightmares doesn't mean separating yourself from the past. Now I finally understand the second half of the sentence. It's okay as long as I live a better life than before. Well, it seems like a good proverb pieced together. Wendy raised her brow. I didn't know you had such literary skills. So I won't sneak out secretly, and you can go to sleep in peace. Nightingale uttered as she held Wendy's hands. It's late. Wendy huffed as the two of them crawled on the big bed, and Wendy summoned a slight breeze to blow out the candle. Good night, Wendy mumbled. Nightingale replied, good night. After Nightingale was sure that Wendy was asleep, she got up from the bed, went into the mist, and walked to Roland's room. Next, it was her time. Darkness was on her side. The next day, Roland received both good news and bad news from Iron Axe. The good news was that after one night's interrogation, High Priest Fairy finally admitted Hermes' plan of secretly replacing Wimbledon III and issuing the royal decree on the selection of Crown Prince. The bad news was that the Church had plotted this war for a long time, so they could weaken the military potential of the Kingdom of Grey Castle and occupy it more quickly. They actually occupied many areas, like the 2 provinces in the southeast of the kingdom. If Roland had not traversed time to become Prince Roland, this plan would probably have destroyed the Kingdom of Grey Castle already. Did you hear all of that? Roland asked Theo, who stood beside him. Go spread the news, especially about the Church's true intentions and Timothy's collaboration with them. The more details you disclose, the better. I want every citizen of the city to know what they have done. Theo answered, yes. Then Roland turned to Iron Axe and ordered, send out another paddle ship to bring Berev and Kyle Sichi here. Iron Axe seemed embarrassed, which was uncommon for him. It's no problem to fetch the director, but the chief alchemist. Will he really agree to leave the lab and waste his precious time on the road? Iron Axe questioned. I'll write to Kyle. Roland frowned. There's a saying that if you don't come back and visit your hometown when you get rich, it's like wearing a black suit in the middle of the night. What's the point if people can't see it? When a man learns impressive skills, he shouldn't mind showing it off. When Kyle was in Redwater City, he always competed with the alchemist workshop in King City. As they say, two of a trade never agree. Now Kyle has a chance to beat his rival, so I don't believe that he won't come. This is also a good opportunity to enlist all the alchemists in King City in one swoop and make them serve me. Chapter 5:12, An Old Friend and a New Friend. There was no doubt that King City was a huge treasure trove. Although it was a rather backward city, and those magnificent buildings meant nothing in Roland's eyes, it was still the most brilliant pearl in the kingdom of Grey Castle. In terms of population, the number of noblemen here far exceeded that of other cities. The first thing anyone who lost their rank and land would do was to come to King City to seek new opportunities. If landless nobles and knights canonized by the royalty were counted, then the population was even bigger. For example, nearly 20% of the citizens in the inner city were noblemen. Most of them received primary education and could read and write, making them all potential officials who deserved training in Roland's eyes. After all, without land and property, they would not resist the new policy too much, and their excellent insight would allow them to accept new things quicker. In terms of industries, King City also hosted the best men of all trades. Besides the merchant and craftsman unions, it also had the biggest alchemist association and the only astrologer association. Roland coveted these talents and summoned Barav and Kyle Sichi to utilize these men as much as possible. In terms of wealth, the value of all the collections in the palace was 10 times that of Duke Ryan, with gold royals, jewelry, and golden handicrafts filling up several storehouses. This, combined with the properties of the other ministers who fell from power along with Timothy, totaled an astonishing number. If their properties were all confiscated, then the city of Neverwinter would be well taken care of for 2 or 3 years. However, Roland did not plan to take away all of the treasures, since it would waste too much time. Besides, he would need a lot of wealth to take over King City and maintain its stability. Neither keeping the money stacked up in the basement nor using it freely was meaningful, so it was best to circulate it. If possible, Roland would love to spend half a year to process all these resources. But compared with King City, which lay far in the middle, it was more important to take Fallen Dragon Ridge and the southernmost region, which lay next to the western region. Soon after Iron Axe left, one guard reported, "Your Majesty, outside the palace, a businesswoman called Margaret wants to see you." Roland's eyes lit up. "Bring her to me." When the businesswoman walked into the hall, he smiled and arose from his seat to welcome her. "We finally meet again. I didn't expect we would meet in the palace of the Kingdom of Grey Castle this time." Margaret raised her hem and curtsied to Roland. "You always surprise me, Your Highness." "No, now I should call you Your Majesty." "It doesn't matter, the enthronement hasn't been held, so I'm not the king yet." Roland waved his hands. "You're not anxious about this, and you do behave in a kingly way." Margaret covered her mouth and smiled. "From now on, there will be business opportunities everywhere in King City. As an old friend, you should take more care of me. Of course, even if you didn't come to me, I'd find you." He laughed openly. "You may not know this, but Border Town and Longsong Stronghold are going to be integrated into one big city. The steam engine company has opened several more production lines, and the yield will triple. It'll also produce more new commodities, and I promise they'll be unparalleled in the 4 kingdoms. I've already seen how creative you can be, so we can talk about these things later in great detail." Margaret nodded. "But that's not why I'm here today. I want to ask another favor from you." "Oh?" Roland asked with great interest. "Tell me." "Could we move to another place to talk?" She glanced around the room and asked quietly. "If the Chamber of Commerce's financial resources can't solve this problem, and now we have to be secretive about it." Has she really encountered so much trouble? The prince thought for a moment. "Then let's go to my study." The study, located on the top floor of the Tower of Crown, belonged to King Wimbledon III originally, and it was also where Prince Roland wanted to be the most when he was a child, this was the only place where he could see his reticent father. However, the reason that Roland picked this place was only that it was too high to have any secret passages, and there was only one set of winding stairs leading to the top of the tower, making it easy to defend and hard to attack. "Can you talk about it now?" There were only him and Margaret left in the room, plus Nightingale, who had already hidden herself. "Sorry, Your Majesty, I swore to someone that I'd tell this to only you," she bowed respectfully. "Thunder wants to see you." "Thunder?" Roland was shocked. "You mean the most famous explorer in the fjords? Didn't he just die in a shipwreck? A real explorer may believe in the three gods, but he wouldn't go to them so easily." Margaret shook her head. "He doesn't want to reveal his whereabouts, especially to Lightning, which is why I need to tell you in secret. Thunder had planned to contact you through Tilly, but he didn't expect that you'd occupy King City so soon, so he changed his plan at the last minute." The businesswoman halted for a while. "He also said that he found some unbelievable things in the east of the Shadow Islands that you'd definitely be interested in, and that they may have something to do with the ruins from hundreds of years ago." "Wait, is he in King City now?" "Yes, he arrived here yesterday. He made this decision after meeting with me." "You don't seem surprised by his coming back from the dead." Roland was surprised. "Have you known about it for a long time?" Margaret nodded. "So the reason that you came to Border Town to do business the first time wasn't that I sent the guards out, but to find Lightning, right?" "I'm sorry I didn't tell you this from the start," she said while holding her hand to her chest. "Lightning wore a magic stone, so Thunder could find where she was. He sent me there just to make sure that she was safe. After learning that Lightning was settled in your domain, he decided to hide his information to keep his daughter far away from being an explorer." "That's it." Roland understood it instantly. "I didn't ask for more details about Thunder's death at the time, and Margaret did speak the truth in some sense, so Nightingale couldn't detect her lies but could only tell that she had no bad intentions towards witches. So there was a reason for this coincidence. Without Lightning, my steam engine trade wouldn't have found business routes so quickly. Now King City is still a mess, so I can't leave the palace," Roland said, after a minute's consideration. "If Thunder wants to meet me, you can bring him here. I promise I won't divulge his information to Lightning." "Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty." Margaret looked very grateful and she bowed again. "I'll deliver your reply to him as soon as possible." Soon after the servants sent the businesswoman away, Roland heard his guards report when he got back to the hall. "Your Majesty, a nobleman outside the palace claimed to be your old friend and made a fuss about coming inside." It surprised him a little. He knew the lower noblemen who were not influenced by the spring offensive would come here to snoop, but he did not expect they would come so soon. Logically, they should have waited to see the policy trends, and they should not come forward so proactively before Timothy was beheaded. He also used to be a prince, so how could he be on good terms with a lower nobleman? "What's his name?" "Sir Yurko, Your Majesty." Chapter 513, Magic Hand Yurko. Pfft, ahem. Roland almost choked on his own saliva. A pale-looking, slightly oversized man with stubby fingers and a curly mohawk appeared within his mind. Roland had almost forgotten about him, but he quickly realized who he was once the name was mentioned. His appearance was as clear as if they had parted just yesterday. The visit was not a surprise. Prince Roland had once been so close with Yurko that he would have given him the shirt off his back. Prince Roland had been out of his mind and was self-loathing after being fiercely rejected by Tilly, realizing that he would never fit into Gerald, Timothy, and Garcia's circle. Yurko's appearance was basically his salvation. Not only did he bring Roland along to the brothel, allowing him a taste of the pleasures of a noble, but he also introduced him to a gang of evil associates to boss around, giving him the prestige that he would never have in the palace. Even though these things were not righteous, he had been Prince Roland's best friend, at least at that time. Roland wanted to reject Knight Yurko, but these memories made him realize that he would not do that if he were still Prince Roland. Not to mention that he needed someone to attract the rest of the nobility to serve him. After a little contemplation, he finally decided to meet the popular magic hand of King City. Bring the knight to my study, he ordered, and remember to confiscate his god's stone of retaliation. Returning to the Tower of Crown, Roland soon met the old friend he was waiting for. Oh my God! Your Majesty! I didn't expect you to come back so quickly and defeat your demon older brother so easily. Prince Roland used to address his siblings as a clan of demons, and Yurko had gone along with this statement in private. His image was very similar to what Roland could remember. Yurko dashed forward and gave Roland a warm hug as soon as he opened the door and walked into the study. Roland reluctantly patted his back like he used to and said, I didn't expect you to come so soon either. Despite the fact that Yurko's average appearance did not relate to his title of Casanova, his round chin always gave people a sense of inexplicable intimacy. Considering his neatly shaved beard, the clean-as-a-pin attire, the perfect smell of his cologne, and his legendary techniques, it was no surprise that so many ladies fell for him. I'm different from them. Those cowards are still worrying about Timothy's remaining power, but I know that you would never let him off so easy. Yurko grinned and asked, since you're back, would you like to have a drink tonight at the Golden Lane? Do you want me to make an appointment with Mrs. Rother or Miss Kingfisher? Ever since that one-night stand, they've been missing you. Roland suddenly felt a chill from behind his back, an ice-cold gaze pierced through his body, casted directly towards Yurko. The knight felt the change too. His voice abruptly ceased, and he started to look around in doubt. How come it suddenly got so cold in here? What one-night stand? I had nothing to do with them, Roland immediately objected. Whatever they're feeling has nothing to do with me. Even if it did, it would only have something to do with Prince Roland. It was totally different from his true self, so what he said was still the truth. Nightingale should not be able to tell the difference. As expected, the chilling sensation reduced drastically following his response. Oh? Is that so? Yurko stroked his chin, but you obviously spent a night with them. It was way past curfew time, and I wasn't able to return to the palace. Otherwise, I would have had to sleep on the street, Roland emphasized. Anyway, I didn't do anything that night, understand? There was a glimmer of doubt on Yurko's face, but his initial smile soon returned. Well, in that case, forget about them. Let's meet some new ones today. You probably have no idea, but a classier brothel opened up right opposite the Golden Lane. I heard that the quality can be compared to private reserves of the nobles, and they only allow entry by invitation. I haven't had a chance to try it out myself yet. I'm sure there'll be no problem for you. What do you think? No, I'm not going anywhere at night. I'm staying in the palace. Oh, I understand, Yurko raised his brows and said. There are quite a few beautiful attendants in the palace as well, so you should enjoy them first. In that case, I'll teach you my famous skills so none of them will forget about you. He sighed and said, you used to be so eager to learn from me, but I thought it would be useless for you back then, even if you mastered the stunt. Now that you're about to become king, I'm afraid you'll have more lovers than I do. So, the stunt should be able to come in handy for you. After all, human energy is limited. Stop. Roland was close to covering Yurko's mouth with his hand. He dared not let Yurko continue. It was utterly a complete collection of dark histories. He did not want to bear the responsibilities of the awful things Prince Roland had done, especially not in front of Nightingale. Listen, friend. I'm different now. Yurko was stunned, but replied, of course. You're now the king, your majesty. I don't mean that, Roland interrupted, but you can also interpret it that way. As a king of the country, I definitely can't be as ruthless as I used to be, understand? He recalled Prince Roland's way of intimate conversation, hooked his arm around Yurko's neck, and said, speaking of which, just tell me what you have in mind. I don't believe that you came here, simply to reminisce about the past. You don't have to hide anything from me. As expected, Yurko laughed and said, in that case, I'll be straightforward. Your Majesty, can you please grant me an official position? What? What about making me your minister? I don't need to be in a key position, such treasurer or minister of justice. Just let me manage the patrol team, like Steelheart Knight. He patted his bulging stomach and said, I can assure you that the rats would be obedient under my watch. Roland could not help but silently roll his eyes. How dare he mention that? The reputation of King City would be ruined if he held the Minister of Defense position. He would bring the patrol team to fool around and summon the men to beat up other Casanovas if he had any conflicts. It was scary to even think about it. However, it could be good publicity if Yorko was given a suitable position. He would have a chance to be promoted during the throne alternation as long as he was willing to serve Roland. After all, Yorko had a clean background. He basically did not have any bad habits other than the fact that he could not control his sexual desire. The key question was what kind of position was suitable for someone like him. Roland contemplated for a while and said, I see. There's no problem with granting a simple official position, however, I'll still have to discuss the specific details with the city hall. After all, it's an official job. He patted the old friend on his shoulder and said, I'll send someone to inform you after I decide. Chapter 514, The Hypothesis of the Spirits. Nightingale appeared from behind him once Yorko left the study. Who are Mrs. Rother and Miss Kingfisher? What's the famous stunt? This is a really tough question to answer. Roland walked towards the window and pretended to be contemplating, but he was actually preventing Nightingale from seeing his expression. Just two ladies whom I was acquainted with. I don't know them very well, and I don't even know their real names. This is the way of interactions among the nobles. They're always hypocritical. Everything's simply for show most of the time and they forget all about it after that. But he said both of them are missing you dearly. Ahem, about that, they're not missing me, but my gold royals, status, and power. After all, I was still a prince back then. So they lost contact with me after I was assigned to Border Town. They would not be so cold to me if they really missed me, would they? Nightingale could only differentiate the truth of the statement, but she could not directly determine the truth of the matter. Thus, Roland decided to use the art of misleading and dispelled Nightingale's doubt with winding statements. Not to mention that he indeed had nothing to do with this nonsense, so he was not at all stressed about it. Regarding the famous stunt. It's a little bit more complicated. Simply put, Yorko can make a woman fall for him with the skills within his hands, as he is named the Magic Hand. I used to be curious because I knew nothing about it, but I don't need any of these skills now, do I? He turned around and looked at Nightingale. However, she quickly avoided the eye contact, and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks. I guess, she said. Phew. I should be safe now. Roland silently sighed in relief. Even though he could always ask Nightingale to wait outside in the beginning, it would not only hurt her trust but also put him in potential danger. After all, Sylvie was still inspecting the entire palace, and the gem list was still missing. It was better to be safe than sorry. After dinner, Roland finally got to meet with Thunder, the great explorer from the fjords. His body was solidly wrapped up, with his head in a hood and a gauze wrapped around his neck. The guards would probably not have let them pass with the way he was dressed if Nightingale had not personally picked him and Margaret up. Thunder took off his coat and gauze after creeping into the study. He respectfully bowed to Roland and said, I've heard of your name from Margaret and Her Highness Tilly a while ago. My respected Roland Wimbledon, Your Majesty, thank you for taking care of Lightning. I'd like to thank you for taking care of Tilly as well, Roland excitedly answered, observing him from head to toe. I heard that you've helped her a lot since she moved to Sleeping Island. Thunder had the typical short blonde-colored hair of fjords locals, just like Lightning. He was brown-skinned and had a stocky body, rugged-looking appearance, and thick sideburns that were conjoined with the stubbles covering half of his face and his chin. His tone was full of energy, and he clearly spent most of his time on the sea. He was completely different from when he first walked into the room without making even the slightest noise. Don't mention it. She was a great help to my adventures. If it wasn't for her help, I'm afraid that the fleet would have been limited to exploring the Shadow Islands. Thunder smiled and said, and, of course, I wouldn't have been able to reach the sea that I've never seen before and witness the existence of Selene. Selene? Roland curiously asked, what's that? A wall that's formed by the sea water that still allows the boats to cross over freely. Thunder narrated what he had seen in detail. It's also what brings me here. Roland was shocked to hear that sea water could overcome gravity and form into ladder-like height differences, allowing boats to sail vertically upwards and cross over smoothly. It sounded incredible. He felt a great wave of emotion in his heart. It would be difficult for him to believe any of these if he had not heard them from the most famous explorer, Thunder. It implied that the gravity here was distorted, forming a unique gravitational field. However, Roland was not able to make any conclusion at this time, as the principle of gravity formation was still unclear. Since magic power was everywhere in this world, he could only guess that perhaps magic causing the formation of Selene. However, he could faintly feel in his heart that the answer was more profound than he could imagine. The planet looked very similar to Earth at a glance, so he quickly referred to the theories he learned as scientific enlightenment and guidance. This was not a surprise, since the existence of human beings and carbon-based organisms led to a rough judgment. The law of substances here was basically similar to the previous universe. It was not metaphysics. The existence of life could be traced back to the speed and direction of atomic spin. It was so precise that none of the machines in the world could be compared. Any change in the constants would cause life to fall apart. Just like a wise man once said, life is just like a set of flush in hand, so it'll no longer be there once the cards are shuffled. He even speculated that the past world might also contain magic, but it had never been discovered due to the lack of witches as terminals. I heard that you can make steam-powered boats without sails that are faster than any sailing ship, Thunder continued after Roland completely processed the news. Therefore, I'd like to ask for your help to build such a ship for me, so that I can sail against the current and the sea wind. Money is not a problem. Please feel free to state your price. Roland said after a while, regarding this matter, gold royals are indeed not a problem. No worries, I'll put the best technology into the ship construction and charge you only the cost of production. Your Majesty, no, you don't have to. Listen. It's no longer your personal matter. Exploring the unknowns of the world is as significant as changing the fate of mankind, Roland interrupted and said. I'll fully support your adventure with only one condition: remember to update me at once with any new discovery. The discussion of the follow-up details continued for another half an hour. However, Thunder probably noticed that it was very difficult for Roland to settle down and concentrate, so he left after setting the next appointment time. Afterwards, Roland continued to sit in front of the desk, frowning and feeling unsettled. What's the matter? Nightingale anxiously asked. You look pale. Nothing, Roland shook his head and sighed. I just have a bad feeling about this. What feelings? Do you know about the spirits? Do you mean those tiny, glowing, heavenly individuals that could bring moisture and recovery to all things on Earth in the epic biography? No, I'm talking about the creatures with pointed ears and human-like bodies, who are elegant, long-lived, and generally prefer to live in the forest. Nightingale contemplated for a moment and said, I've never heard of them. I've only read about them in a storybook, Roland slowly explained. These fictional species basically spread their footprints through the entire continent. However, they were forced to hide in the deep forest after the rise of mankind, putting them on the verge of extinction. As intelligent as they were far less in number compared to the latecomers. Facing the coalition of mankind that was 100 times larger than they were, the spirits appeared to be totally defenseless, trapped themselves within the deserted mountains, and became increasingly outdated. Their technology was eventually taken over by mankind, and they ended up as pets. What do you think? He continued without waiting for Nightingale's answer, we're just like the spirits now. As a member of mankind himself, Roland had totally neglected this, but now he shuddered at that thought. Although mankind was indeed a thriving race comparing to the spirits, it did not mean that they would always thrive the most among the intelligent creatures. Nowadays, mankind was actually the minority, and they were at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. They were trapped by the demons in a corner of the continent and were totally oblivious to the outside world. He decided to fully support Thunder in exploring the new maritime space for this reason as well. If mankind was not more foresight and did not actively assess their situation within the world they were in, they could only be eliminated like the spirits. Both battles of divine will wasted nearly 1,000 years. Hopefully, it's not too late for all this, Roland thought to himself. Chapter 5:15, The Magic Painting. Good morning, Miss Soraya. As Soraya stepped into the bicycle factory, Jilly came up and said, "You're so early." This made Soraya feel a bit embarrassed because she had stayed up late last night playing Fight the Landlord with Mystery Moon and Lily, which made her wake up half an hour later than usual. When Wendy was not around, everyone became slightly lazy, of course, except for Anna and Agatha. Whether it was work or learning, they had always set a great example for the other sisters, especially Agatha. She always arrived early and stayed late. Soraya asked Jilly, "Is the material ready?" "Yes, please follow me," Jilly replied. As a student in the first graduating class, Jilly became Soraya's assistant after graduation. Her main job was to inform Soraya of her daily schedule. A year ago, Soraya would have never believed that ordinary people and witches could work together in harmony. "Are those the finished bicycles?" Soraya asked, since she suddenly noticed that the factory was a bit different today. The steam machine was not in operation and everyone stood around and stared at a row of brand new vehicles. "Yes, these are the first batch of products," Jilly said with a smile. 20 bicycles in total. It's not easy to make, especially the chains and wheels. The rate of the finished products was less than 50%. She finished. It's not easy indeed, Soraya thought. The factory was built last autumn, but since then, it had experienced all kinds of difficulties, such as the equipment not being ready, a serious shortage of human resources, and so on. It was clearly less prioritized when compared to the steam assembly plant and chemical plant next door. Both of the neighboring plants operated in 3 shifts and people were working at all times. However, the bicycle factory only operated during the daytime. Once, even Jilly complained that her friend, who had worked for the chemical plant, had a salary 3 times more than hers, but she had never seen a single bicycle made. Now Jilly finally obtained a bicycle of her own. As Soraya walked into her office, she saw that the ground had already been paved with a layer of white paper that was about 40 square meters. The white paper made the floor look as if there was snow on the ground. "Sorry to disturb you, the part we need to process today is the inner tire," Jilly explained to Soraya and then bowed. "Okay," the witch nodded and said, "You may go on with your work. Well, please call me if you need any help." She laughed. "I'm just around the door." Seeing Jilly leave excitedly, Soraya knew that she could not wait to ride the bicycle. Soraya smiled and shook her head as she took off her shoes and stepped on the tiled paper floor. Soraya usually painted the inner tires, outer tires, and bicycle frames based on the demand of the bicycle factory. Soraya's painting speed was faster than the factory's production speed, so there were a lot of such things in stock. Given that magical powers grew every day, it was a waste not to use it. So Soraya came to the factory every 3 days to finish her painting tasks. She recalled the color the inner tire should be painted and lifted her hand to summon the magic pen. As a film material that contained gas, it must be light, soft and ductile enough and could be fused at high temperatures. From past experiences, she chose shaving coating method for it. After hundreds of tests, she found that sky coating was too flexible and ripple coating too thermoresistant. When she was collecting raw materials, she noticed the wood shavings left by the carpenters and finally found the ideal painting materials. Unlike Lucia, she was unable to break down materials into elementary substances and then mix them at any proportion. She had to understand the material's characteristics by painting it out, and she was unable to remember thousands of materials and their properties. Therefore, the simplest way for her to remember was to make a color card. She would choose the appropriate coating from the color card when needed. Of course, as the paint used for the inner and outer tires were common, Soraya was able to draw without referring to the color card. The magic pen gradually widened to 6 meters as Soraya was standing at the center of the brush. Actually, the magic pen could expand at most to 10 meters, but in that condition it could easily get out of control. So, she would rather spend more time drawing with a smaller brush to ensure the quality. Within 2 hours, the 40 square meters of paper was coated with a layer of wood shavings. Of course, the paint was not real wood shavings. It was just like her steel painting was not real steel, but a material that was breakable like glass. A thing could never be extremely hard and extremely ductile at the same time. Inside the wood shavings, Soraya engraved her name as a signature. This is a tradition among artists. Initially, Soraya signed at the lower right corner of the coating, but later, she found out that after the coating was cut, her name would only appear in one inner tube. So, she decided to sign everywhere. By doing so, no matter how the cutting was, people could always see Soraya's work. At first, Soraya panicked when His Highness noticed it. She thought she would be punished, but instead, His Highness praised her as a watermark inventor. Although she did not understand the meaning of watermark, Soraya still felt happy for a few days after being praised by His Highness and decided to continue to sign her name on her work. After the painting was completed, the next process was to burn the paper at one side of the coating to obtain the raw materials for the inner tire. It then would be sent to the cutting room to be cut into strips which would be welded into tires by hot iron. All these tasks were performed by dedicated workers, and Soraya just needed to prepare the raw materials for them. The painting she made today almost consumed 1/3 of her magic power and reminded her of the importance of training. Training would greatly upgrade her magical powers. In the past, this workload would make her exhausted, but now after she said goodbye to Jill, she still had energy and power to go to the North Slope mine alone. After entering the mountain, there was a sentry stationed almost every 100 meters as well as a bunker and watchtower set up at the entrance. Even the Lord's castle was not so tightly guarded. As Soraya entered the yard, the soldiers saluted her. She saw Anna thoroughly focused on cutting some strange parts as usual. At this sight, Soraya suddenly felt a bit ashamed of herself and at the same time felt some admiration for Anna, who was so talented and still so hardworking. Anna was also the favorite witch of His Highness. "Hey, Sister Soraya, you're here," Lucia announced and smiled as she heard Soraya's footsteps. Anna also put down the parts in her hand and waved at her. "Please, here are some copper wires to be painted," Anna requested. "No problem." Soraya smiled and walked towards them. Chapter 5:16, The Music of Recovery. What Soraya did was to cover the cut copper wire with a layer of hard anti-corrosion coating so that it could be used for the City of Neverwinter's 3 supplies project. This process was easier than coating the inner wire, as the thickness did not require much accuracy. After choosing the color card, Soraya turned the magic pen into a round tube. Once scanned from top to bottom, the pigment will become solid on the metal surface. It was a trick she learned from Anna, to make better use of magic power by changing its form. However, there was still a big gap between them because Anna's ability to control magic was almost perfect. Soraya witnessed the black fire as it was cutting metal ingots. It seemed like a performance instead of a task. The 3 types of black fire were in different forms, and they cut through the metal from different angles, making a number of parts that were all the same size, or directly created a complete machine. It was easy to remember the characteristics of the black fire at different lengths. It was, however, hard to control the many types of it and make them work together while maintaining the different characteristics of their magic power. In order to do that, there should be no difference between magic power and limbs, and the magic power might need to be more flexible. "Is it a vine?" Lucia asked as she stared curiously at the colors painted by the magic pen. "Exactly, this is a 10-year-old grapevine." Soraya explained, "It's hard and difficult to break, very close to His Highness requirement." 10 years old. Is that necessary? Of course. She could not help laughing. Young vines are obviously softer and less resistant to corrosion and heat. It's not just about their ages. Materials such as wood, paper, and cloth have different properties in wet and dry conditions. That's why I need to use color cards to record them. If this is true, there'll be more color cards than metal formulas, exclaimed Lucia. Not really, Soraya thought for a while and said, elementary chemistry states that the characteristics of a material might undergo huge changes while its composition has subtle changes. But, the color card of wood has no noticeable changes when it's mixed with 10% or 15% water. Wow, you record the whole world with just a pen. Lucia was amazed. This is really an enviable ability. She smiled but did not answer. She was thinking of Anna, who really had an enviable ability. If the magic pen was recording the world, then the black fire was creating the world. Most of the changes in the town were related to Anna. Several of the machines at the corner of the courtyard displayed proof of that. As long as they were connected to the steam engine, they were able to produce strong bursts of power. The workers became an add-on to the black fire through a machine. In a sense, Anna's creation enabled the ordinary people to have power close to the witches. Today's job was considered done after coating 5 bundles of copper wire. Soraya's working life was very consistent. She would go to different places to complete partial coatings every day. Since her painting speed had improved, only about half of her magic power would be exhausted by midday. When a witch consumed all her magic power, she would feel tired or even faint. Therefore, they would usually retain 30% of their power during the daily training. Typically, as additional training to consume more magic power, she would continue to collect color cards and capture new colors. Still, Soraya became less productive because Wendy and His Highness were not around. For that reason, she decided to join Mystery Moon and others and fight the landlord game later. She thought that this was definitely not slacking off. It was just a temporary entertainment. Time always flew fast while playing a game. The whole afternoon passed within a wink. After dinner, Scroll announced some unexpected news. Today's evening course has been cancelled and changed to Echo's ability test. Well, hasn't she done her ability test before? Lily wondered and said, why does she have to do it again? This is great, said Mystery Moon almost immediately while covering Lily's mouth with her hand. I've never tested anyone else's abilities. Lily stared angrily at Mystery Moon till she stopped covering her mouth and muttered softly. The point is the class has been dismissed. Why don't you feel happy? Teacher Scroll, what should we do? Asked Ring, the only non-witch in the hall. You just need to focus and listen, replied Scroll with a smile. I fancy not everyone needs to attend the test. Agatha stood up. If not, I'll go back to my room. That won't do. Scroll shook her head. You're one of the reasons for the test. Me? She asked, frowning. All of the witches looked at Agatha, including Soraya. Yes. You're too stressed and your body won't be able to bear it if you consume all your magic power every day. In Tequila, senior witches do the same, said Agatha carelessly. Are you not aware of the brutality of the battle of divine will? It'll never stop until the opponent collapses. I believe that the Union is willing to sacrifice all its members if they're able to find the path to victory. But as Highness said before, simply forcing yourself will reduce your efficiency. Resting is necessary for doing things, both studying and working, Scroll said softly. I have told him your situation, so the test is an attempt. Test what? The recovery skill of Echo. The phrase surprised the witches. Can she heal the wounded like Nana? Soraya doubted it. Echo's ability was to simulate all kinds of sounds. She was useless in the Witch Cooperation Association. She would not have been despised by Kara if she could heal others. Scroll paused for a moment. I don't know the exact reason. It's His Highness's idea. She looked outside. Are you ready? Let's begin. Echo walked to the hall and ascended the podium. She was a little nervous. Everyone was holding their breath and waiting for her to exercise her ability. The music rang softly, like a clear spring ringing in everyone's ears. Then she sang a melodious song in her own voice instead of simulating one. Suddenly, Soraya felt that everything around her had changed. The stone castle gradually faded into the darkness and her body was surrounded by warm springs. It was as if she were enveloped by a white mist, and upon her was a sky full of stars. The cool breezes blew through her warm body. She could not help humming out loud and was completely relaxed and immersed in this very comfortable spring. At the end of the song, Soraya slowly opened her eyes after a long time. She understood the meaning of recovery without any explanation. There was no increase in magic power, but the fatigue of the day was swept away. Her body became active and strong. Chapter 517, The Real Alchemy. When Kyle Sichi returned home, he immediately saw a dark envelope on the dinner table. "What's this?" He looked at his wife Sarah, who was busy at work in the kitchen. "Oh, by the way, City Hall's officials came around this afternoon." His wife wiped her hands clean and placed an appetizing bowl of meat broth onto the table. "They said His Highness wants you to go to King City, and a boat will come in 2 days to escort you there." "Isn't he going there to confront his brother?" "Why would he want me there?" "What a complete waste of time," said Kyle with a frown. "It'll take at least a week's journey. His demands are really going too far." "He's your prince, lord of the city of Neverwinter, dear," said Sarah, shaking her head with a smile. "Also, City Hall's officials said that he wrote you a personal letter to show how important this trip was." "That's quite an honor, isn't it? You should keep this letter safe after you finish reading it, so we can probably pass it on as a family heirloom." "Family heirloom? If only it were the complete edition of Intermediate Chemistry. Kyle curled his lip. "Let's discuss this after dinner." He'd better have a good reason. After his simple meal, he ducked into his study and opened the envelope. A small strip of paper as long as a finger fell out. This was obviously a secret letter sent by a carrier pigeon, which was then placed in an envelope by the City Hall officials. Kyle used one hand to press the paper and the other to fumble around the table for his monocle and placed it on the bridge of the nose. Due to reading over a long period of time under faint candlelight, his vision was getting worse day by day. Luckily, his life in the town has been improved a lot, and he could light 5 or 6 candles at a time in his office, but he did not know when his house could be installed with the kind of bright lights that lit up the chemical plant. There was only one short sentence on the strip of paper. "Do you still remember the alchemist workshop of King City? Now it's your chance to show them what the real alchemy is." Kyle gasped. The alchemist workshop of King City was the ultimate dream position for all aspiring alchemists who searched for the truth of all things, and he was no exception when young. Only his wife knew that he had once applied to the alchemist workshop of the King City. He had planned to gain admission using the gold-dissolving liquid that he had invented by himself at the age of 20. However, Kyle's formula unexpectedly failed during the review process, and he could not produce the smoking brown acid liquor even after 2 attempts. The reviewing alchemist Retnine was outraged and accused Kyle of intentionally wasting the workshop's valuable ingredients. He denied Kyle a 3rd try and even ordered the guards to seize his purse and kick him out. Outside the workshop, Retnine coldly tossed 5 silver royals from the purse to Kyle, saying that he should buy a trip back to Redwater City, while the rest of the purse was compensation for the workshop's loss. He left as soon as he was done talking, leaving Kyle with only rejection and a great shame. This left a gaping scar in his heart, and he never told anyone about it except his wife. Kyle returned to Redwater City full of rage, but he continued to pursue alchemy and spend all his time in his workshop, trying to find a new formula to prove the alchemist workshop of King City wrong. Finally, after 10 years, when he was 30 years old, he developed a second formula. For this reason, he was promoted as an alchemist in Redwater City. It took him another 6 years to become the chair. Kyle had always viewed the alchemist workshop of King City as his greatest enemy, and he interacted with them a couple times in his work, as well. But their alchemists were always extremely haughty and did not recognize any other alchemist organizations except their own. They believed that Redwater City's alchemists were only as good as their apprentices and students and did not deserve the title of an alchemist. Their supposedly newfound alchemy formulas were mostly discovered by the alchemist workshop of King City a dozen years ago. The workshop chair even said other cities did not need to build alchemical workshops because this line of work required a great amount of money and manpower, which regular lords could not afford at all. If people needed the help of alchemists, they could seek it directly from King's City. If the lords invested tens of thousands of gold royals into their own workshops, they would probably make no progress with the end of a bunch of useless men. Embarrassingly, Kyle knew that only the alchemic workshop of Redwater City saw the workshop of King's City as a competitor, but the latter did not care about him at all. He was overjoyed by his success in the double stone acid-making method and the production of crystal glass because he could produce large amounts of valuable acid with the former, and the latter was the most highly demanded alchemic product on the market. Even the proud alchemist workshop could not ignore his two accomplishments. In an unexpected and theatrical turn of events, Roland Wimbledon, a border town, found him and opened his eyes to a whole world of possibilities with elementary chemistry. From then on, Kyle realized that everything he had learned was meaningless. The alchemy itself was a backward practice and doomed for extinction, while a new path of exploration lay ahead of him. This time, the relationship between all things was no longer murky, but clear and organized. His past squabbles were also pointless, and he let go of his vendetta with the alchemist workshop of King's City and the formulas that had taken him so much effort to develop. It's reasonable to do so. However, when His Highness mentioned this word again, Kyle Sichi's heart still raced, and an indescribable excitement crept back into his heart. Kyle's mind recalled the cold figure, the muddy silver royals, the door that slammed shut, and the outrageous claim that there was no need for other alchemic workshops except the alchemist workshop of King's City to exist. Now it's your chance to show them what the real alchemy is. Kyle scanned the strip of paper one last time, stood up, and walked out of his office. Sarah. He paused in the middle of his sentence and noticed that his wife was bending over, packing his clothes into an open bag in the living room. What's this? It's for your journey to King's City. I knew that even if His Highness didn't write you a letter, you'd still go, said Sarah with a smile. Do you still remember the stories you told me? There are things that you're owed in that city. Kyle stared at her blankly for a while and then burst out in laughter. Take good care of our home. I have to pay a visit to King's City. Chapter 518, The New Journey of Magic Hand. It was a bright and sunny day in King's City, making it perfect for a sentencing day. A cannon would sound on the square every hour, signaling that another formerly prominent and important figure received his deserved verdict. Their convictions had actually already been decided, so this process was mostly used as a propaganda for the citizens. It especially condemned the church and Timothy for conspiring against the king and stealing the throne. After a week of preparation, the evidence collected against them proved their guilt without a doubt. Of course, Roland did not actually give them a chance to argue for themselves. Only a few of the nobles were sentenced to hanging. Besides Timothy, his henchman, the prime minister, and judge, all the other sentenced men were the church believers. Even the church of King's City was completely uprooted, and Roland made sure that everyone who was involved in spreading the demonic plague got what they deserved. These scumbags will surely be met by cheers from the audience when they're brought to the gallows. Are you not going to watch it in person? Asked Nightingale, standing by the window. Iron Axe and Theo will take care of everything, replied Roland without even raising his head. Public trials helped excite and unite the subjects in Border Town, but they would not have the same effect here. The people would not automatically side with Roland as soon as he killed Timothy, just like they did not side with Timothy after King Wimbledon III and Gerald died. He did not have enough support among the citizens here. He was also concerned about his own safety. Sylvie eventually found the gem list Roland remembered, which Timothy had hidden in a secret compartment in his closet. However, there were 12 more names than the gems there, 4 of which were hidden in King's City. It meant that they had all received Timothy's orders. Although they were not necessarily the assassination orders, Roland still kept his guard up. Execution grounds were too disorderly and unsuitable for him to visit, and he had no interest in watching executions. He had much more important things to deal with. For example, the army. The casualties in capturing King's City were finally calculated, revealing that the First Army lost 33 men, which was their worst loss so far. Although they killed a much larger amount of enemies than that, Roland still noticed many flaws in their street battle tactics, especially in house demolition, Most of the First Army's casualties were caused when enchanted soldiers surprised them by leaping out from civilian houses. If his soldiers could use rifle grenades or blasting cartridges to demolish suspicious houses in their way, there would definitely be lighter casualties. His other concern was the size of the army. The First Army could take on the entire kingdom of Grey Castle with its 3,000 men, but it was not enough to conquer everything in his sights. He would have to leave at least 500 men behind to maintain order in King's City, and after conquering Fallen Dragon Ridge and the southernmost region, the army would be too small to maintain a peace war. He needed to expand his army. Roland wrote down the plans for death benefits and army expansion and handed them to his guards. He ordered them to take the plans back to the city of Neverwinter, where the city hall would carry them out. After that, the prince directed his attention to the lower-level nobles. They did not have any substantial political power, but they were all well-educated and desperately wanted to be promoted. All the great nobles in King's City had already been cleared out. They were either exiled from the territory or sent to the Neverwinter mines, leaving many vacancies in the office. In order for King's City to run normally, the most effective tactic was to have these lower nobles work for him. Berev had years of experience in King's City and definitely knew some of these men, so he would be in charge of organizing a temporary ruling system. These men were willing to serve him, so giving them greater responsibilities would increase their eagerness. Yorko was Roland's first try. Over the past few days, he finally decided where he should assign his old friend. Yorko shouted as soon as he entered Roland's office, "Oh God, you really killed all of the church scoundrels. I would never have guessed that they spread the demonic plague, and I couldn't even believe my ears when High Priest Fairy confessed to it. What a disgrace to the deities. Right now, the crowds on the square are praising your name and saying that you saved them 6 months ago." Roland smiled. Theo had ordered the rats to spread this news to corroborate the refugee camps from 6 months ago. It seemed that it was quite effective. However, Yorko probably made up the part about praising his name to flatter him. He did not question his words and handed a delicate lambskin letter to Yorko. "Take a look at this." Yorko opened the letter, glanced at it, and widened his eyes. You're making me the ambassador of the Kingdom of Grey Castle?" "Yes, and a permanent one," said Roland with a nod. "You'll have an official letter of appointment, scepter, and seal, and you'll reside in the City of Glow in the Kingdom of Dawn. What do you think?" This position had taken a great amount of consideration. As the famed magic hand in King's City, Yorko had a bad reputation, just like Prince Roland did in the past. No one wanted to be made a cuckold, including the nobles. While their wives cheated on them with other men, instead of simply catching them in the act, the husbands also meddled in brothels and bars, but it was all in secrecy. If Yorko was given an important position, or if Roland openly gave the magic hand a job in the city hall, it would have an unimaginable influence. All the nobles and merchants would be worried that their wives would begin to openly pursue Yorko, and the women that Yorko had slept with would all try to take advantage of him. Roland did not want this to happen. His best option was to place him in a foreign country. Kingdom ambassadors were different from traveling emissary delegations, and they had similar authority as earls, so even foreign kings treated them with respect. This was an important sounding title that was perfect as a promotion. He also did not have to give him any land, and he would not worry any of the other noble. Let him go bother the Kingdom of Dawn. I heard that their noblewomen are exotic and outstanding, so he might be able to make a new name for himself there. Yorko obviously also realized this point. He knelt down without any hesitation and replied excitedly, "I accept, my lord." He was so eager as if he was worried that Roland would regret his decision. "Then it's decided," said Roland with a smile. "Before you leave, I'll have a ceremonial officer to train you." Besides Yorko, he also needed to send some of his own men to the Kingdom of Dawn, so he could keep an eye on his neighbor and also form an alliance with them to fight the church. Chapter 519, The Secret Within the Stars. Roland shook his head with a smile as he watched Yorko excitedly bowed and left. He did not mind helping the people who had helped Prince Roland in the past, as long as they did not have any bad intentions. "Where's Wendy right now?" He turned around and asked Nightingale after taking care of this matter. She's probably on the top of the tower practicing her ability. Do you want me to summon her? Yes, and get Sylvie, Lightning, and Maggie as well. We're going to visit the astrologers, said Roland. And we'll be flying to them. I understand. Nightingale's eyes lit up. Even if someone wants to attack me, they can't pose a threat against a hydrogen balloon, so this is the best way to travel. Roland had learned via carrier pigeon that Kyle was on his way, so he postponed his visit to the alchemist workshop. He was very curious about the Astrology Association, the other main academic organization in King City. Roland also had a great point of confusion that needed to be confirmed. The Astrology Association was located on a mountain in the northern area of the outer city, and it was only the second in height to the twin towers of the palace. The Astrology Hall had a pretty unique design, and it looked like a hexagonal stone tower with a flat top from above. It had a wide base and narrow top, and its silhouette was precisely symmetrical. Roland knew what symmetry implied in that era. Without advanced measuring and positioning methods, it was nearly impossible to build such a large yet perfect stone structure, a process even more difficult than building a giant city wall. The guards had left earlier and surrounded the stone tower. As the hydrogen balloon released the air and slowly landed on the tower roof, its passengers were immediately greeted by Brian, Sean, and Alva Tabor. Your Majesty, this area has been completely sealed, and I promise that not a single rat will escape. We have also confiscated all the astrologers' god stones of retaliation, allowing Miss Sylvie to use her magic power, so you can interact with them freely. Good job. Stay alert. Roland nodded in approval and shifted his sight to the row of men in grey robes standing behind the guards. They were all aged over 30 years old, and they kept peeking at the hydrogen balloon in panic. They were obviously still rattled by his sudden appearance from the sky. Roland turned to Alva. Who's in charge around here? Tell him to come see me. Yes, my lord. Alva spoke briefly with two old men in robes, and one of them cautiously walked to Roland with him. Your Majesty, this is King City's chief astrologer of Dispersion Star. Your Majesty Roland Wimbledon, your honored presence makes all the stars shine brighter. Why don't you use your real name? Asked Roland, raising an eyebrow. It's a tradition of the Astrology Association, explained Alva hastily. Every astrologer dreams of naming themselves after a star image, and only people who discover new star images are allowed such an honor. So you discovered the dispersion star? Yes, Your Majesty, said the old man with his hand on his chest. It forms a dispersion star ring with 3 other dark stars, and it represents death and rebirth. What about them? Roland pointed at the other men in grey robes. These 8 are star image masters of the astrological station, so they all made their own discoveries. Dispersion Star respectfully described them one by one. They can explain the meaning behind anything from changes in the stars to dusk and dawn, of course, so can I. I'm not here to have my fortune explained. The old man paused in shock. Then, Your Majesty, may I ask why you're here? I'm here to explore the stars. Roland shrugged. Let's continue this conversation indoors. By the way, bring the diagrams of all the star images you've discovered. You have records for these, right? Mark the brightest stars and connect them with a thin line. Yes, those things. Stacks of parchment piled up on the table in the hall, some tinged with yellow due to their age. Roland took a deep breath and used a pen to draw a spoon and hourglass on a piece of paper, and connecting the bright stars with lines according to the star's diagram. Your Majesty, what are these? Asked the scholar confusedly. They're 2 star images. He picked up the paper and showed it to the group of astrologers. Have you ever seen images like these before? They all shook their heads. Search for similar images in all of these parchments, ordered Roland. Everyone, takes a pile, and be sure to look at every single one. His great confusion was, am I on a different side of the same planet? It's not surprising that this place also has a sun and a moon. The sun is just a regular fixed star. There are billions of fixed stars in the Milky Way, and there are billions of galaxies like the Milky Way in the universe, so it's not unlikely that there's another fixed star system in the infinitely large universe. However, I'm not sure about species similarities. Biological evolution occurred by the coincidental outbreak, so there could be completely different organisms produced in the same environment. Whether it's demonic beasts or demons, I don't think they evolved from the same natural world as Earth's. He decided to use star images to address this confusion. Fixed stars had lifespans of billions of years, and their location barely ever changed, so they had always been used to determine the direction or hold symbolic meaning. Roland only remembered 2 star images, the commonly known Big Dipper and Orion. If he could find them among the constellations, he would be able to determine his location. After an hour, no one had found the constellations. Roland also used this time to ask astrologer of Dispersion Star about a few of this world's most famous star images, but he had never heard of any of them. The Kingdom of Grey Castle astrologers also did not know of the zodiac star images. In general, the bright stars on these star images were far denser than the star images he knew, which meant he was closer to the center of the galaxy. This was because fixed stars were closer together towards the galaxy's center. Then it's very likely that I'm not on Earth. This answer slightly disappointed Roland. He sighed and glanced around the hall. How many members are there in the Astrology Association? Your Majesty, there are 9 astrologers, 156 apprentices, and 67 handymen and masons, replied astrologer of Dispersion Star. I plan to shut down the astrological station. Pack your bags and return to the city of Neverwinter with me. The words instantly changed the expression on everyone's face. Alva said in a terrified tone, Your Majesty, how could you? I don't believe in astrology. I only believe in personal choice, said Roland nonchalantly. And I'm the King of Grey Castle, so I can shut this down if I wish to. You'll learn the truth about star images in the Western region, and you won't see them as the meaningless pathways for fate anymore. With all due respect, Your Majesty Wimbledon, you can't do this. The chief astrologer slowly rose and said, We have to watch the stars at all times without interruption. This order was passed by your ancestors. Chapter 520, The Star of Extinction. Ancestor? Roland blurted out, What the hell? He noticed everyone staring at him astonished. Roland cleared his throat and said, No, I mean, who knows if it's true. Then he felt his left shoulder being gently pinched. Your Majesty, it's true, and I can prove it, the chief lowered his head and said. But you are the only one who can see it. When the rest of the astrologers heard what the chief said, they got up and left the room on their own. Roland thought for a moment and nodded to the witches and the guards, saying, I'm fine. You guys go as well. He would still have Nightingale with him as a last line of defense in case of any emergency. The chief astrologer, Dispersion Star, entered a chamber next to the hall. After a long time, he returned to the long table with an iron box in his hands. He respectfully placed it in front of Roland. What's this? It is the instruction left by your ancestor. He'd expected that this kind of thing would happen. You mean closing the astrological station? Roland asked surprised. Yes, Your Majesty, and such a thing did happen before, the chief said with a wry smile. Although astrology and alchemy are both called the academics of sages, they are different. Alchemists can bring big profit to the kingdom while we have little output. Besides, the Astrology Association consumes many gold royals every year to purchase high-quality crystal and hire craftsmen. In order to prevent frugal future generations from dismissing the Astrology Association, your ancestor engraved the instruction and demanded that nobody interfere with it. Roland opened the box. Unexpectedly, what he saw was a stack of gold sheets. It seemed that the Wimbledon family had been willing to spend heavily on preserving this instruction. He laid out the gold sheets on the table and counted. There were 8 of them. Each one was about 3 millimeters thick and 2 palms wide, heavy in his hands. What the chief astrologer said just now was engraved on the first sheet. Nobody should interfere with the members of the astrological station in looking at the night sky, where lay mysteries which can show the fate of the world. The latter part of the words caught Roland's attention and he became lost in thought. In fact, this association itself was very strange. If the astrology really worked, King Wimbledon III must not be replaced by the church without any preparation. Instead, he should kill the high priest first. Just now even the astrologer of Dispersion Star himself had mentioned the astrological station had little output. That meant he did not regard the divination as a product. Now he seemed helpless, totally different from the first time Roland had met him when he had looked like a church scoundrel. As for the ancestor who had expended considerable funds and manpower to establish such an association and engraved instruction on the gold sheet at all cost to deter post-generations from closing it, for it had no practical use, Roland did not believe that he was simply an astrophile keen on studying things outside of the planet while his kingdom was so underdeveloped. Obviously, the astrologers must hold a task that had nothing to do with divination, but was very likely related to the latter part of the sentence. He checked the other gold sheets again and again, only to find records of the basic star observation methods and the history of the Astrology Association. The last sheet even recorded the principle of enlarging crystal lenses and referred to a supreme commander. It seemed that the ancestor of the Wimbledon family had also been chief astrologer of this association at the time. Roland recalled the Wimbledon family history but could not think of anything related to the description on this sheet. He picked up the first sheet again, pointing to the latter part of the sentence. "What does this mean?" "I don't know," the chief shook his head as he spoke. Roland felt a pinch on his right shoulder before the chief had barely finished his words. He could not help chuckling, saying, "Listen, the man is more flexible than the rigid rule, and this order left by an ancestor was probably correct while he was alive, but the times have changed, and I don't want to be bound by this rule from hundreds of years ago. I'm the king of the kingdom of Greycastle, and I can do what I want. Do you understand?" "What?" "No, you." The chief stared at Roland. "You yourself know it clearly. You're only wasting money. You remain ignorant about the mysteries of the fate of the world. Besides, when my father was murdered by the church, you couldn't even give him a warning. Why should I keep you here to stare at the sky? You can't exchange the stars for gold royals. So, please pack up and come with me to the western region." Hearing Roland's words, Dispersion Star, who already had an unfavorable opinion of Prince Roland, who had been intractable and unscrupulous in the king's city, suddenly looked dour. After a long time, the chief said reluctantly, "You'll probably regret knowing this secret." "How do I know if you don't tell me?" Roland smiled. It was really advantageous sometimes to intimidate others by pretending to be like the foppery Prince Roland. With these old men, this was the only way to get an answer, for it was impossible to ask Iron Axe to grill them. "We've been undertaking a mission that lasts for hundreds of years. It began when the first Lord Wimbledon arrived in this region." The chief calmed down and said, "This secret can only be revealed to the successor of the royal family when he becomes king, and has reached the age of 30. "Why?" "Because your ancestor thought that the successors might be too confused and panic if they knew it ahead of time and lead to the decline of the kingdom." He hesitated for a moment and confessed, "In fact, we're looking for the Star of Extinction." "What's that?" Roland asked in surprise. "A scarlet star, or the bloody moon. When it comes, the world will fall into a disaster beyond redemption." The prince suddenly felt a shock and began to wonder. The coming of the bloody moon had been mentioned not only in the ancient Book of the Remains but also by Agatha of the Union. Why did a secular association also pay attention to this? Did the Astrology Association have inextricable links with the Union? "Please be specific," Roland demanded. "What I know is all from the former chief," Dispersion Star said in a deep voice. "It's said that there's a red star floating in the night sky. When it comes out like the crescent moon, the world will be destroyed. What we're going to do is to find it before it becomes a crescent moon. If its orbit can be found, we can predict the doomsday in advance. This is also the intention of the horoscope." "Become a crescent moon?" "Actually, it's natural that you don't know the star image," the chief explained. "The stars are always following a fixed path, such as the sun and the moon, and they appear at a fixed time. When they disappear, it doesn't mean they're gone. They just temporarily move to a position where we can't see. We call this path orbit. In fact, most stars have an orbit of their own.